BBC London 94.9, it's 9:05.
BBC London 94.9.
Vanessa Feltz. Weekday mornings from 9.
Call 020 722 42000.
Muslim leaders have called on the Met Commissioner to take serious action to stop anti-Islamic attacks following yesterday's suspected arson attack on a Somali community centre in Muswell Hill. Since Lee Rigby's death in Woolwich, a number of mosques have been targeted. The Bomber Command Memorial in Green Park has been vandalised, and there have been protests by far-right groups. Police say they're working with the Somali community in North London to provide support and reassurance, but the Muslim Council of Great Britain says it's time for a proper response from the Met. Newspapers report the building being daubed with EDL graffiti before the torching. The Guardian's G2 section this morning, entitled "Don't Panic, I'm Islamic," begins thus. "I don't really want to go out now," Rizwan Ali says anxiously. "If I needed something, I used just to go to the shops, but I've been staying in." On the 24th of May, the father of four went to Friday prayers at his local mosque. On the way home, he popped into Pound Stretcher to have a look at some gardening equipment. As he browsed, he noticed another customer staring at him. "He was looking at me as though I'd done something," Ali explained. Then he started shouting, "You are a Muslim. You are a soldier killer." I was shocked and scared. It was very upsetting. Monitors say, and an organisation called Tell Mama, that there's been a wave of attacks, harassment and hate-filled speech against Muslims, an unprecedented number of incidents, including a rise in street harassment of Muslims, unprovoked opportunistic attacks from strangers as Muslims go about their lives. Over the past week or so, since the Woolwich killing of drummer Lee Rigby, these sort of hate crimes have noticeably increased in number and in many instances become more extreme, according to Tell Mama. The scale of the backlash is astounding, they say. There's been a massive spike in anti-Muslim prejudice. A sense of endemic fear has gripped Muslim communities. So I'm asking for your position this morning. Do you live in Muswell Hill? Are you familiar with the Islamic Centre? Are you horrified at this act of destruction? Or are you surprised that anyone is surprised? After the killing of drummer Rigby, do you feel that reprisals are inevitable? Have you been expecting a spate of attacks, incidents and destruction across the capital? Are you a Muslim and are you living in fear? Do you feel that people are looking at you and appraising you in a hostile, even in a threatening manner? The day after drummer Rigby was killed, you'll remember I took a call from a gentleman whose friend's Muslim son was spat at school. So how has life panned out for you since? Now, Andrew Gilligan, writing in The Telegraph, disagrees with the claims of Tell Mama. He argues that the number of anti-Muslim incidents has been exaggerated and that the claim that they are unprecedentedly high is false. He says after London's 7/7 attacks, there was a far bigger and more prolonged rise in hate crimes. He says drummer Rigby's killers have failed. The breakdown in community relations has not come. Is he right? 0207 224 2000.
This is Vanessa Feltz. Weekday mornings from 9.
On BBC London 94.9.
Good morning, lovely listener. Welcome to BBC London 94.9. Many thanks to Paul and Penny for a tremendous breakfast show this morning. I'm Vanessa Feltz and you can find me here on BBC London 94.9 every weekday morning between 9 and 12. And this morning, of course, we are talking about what Mayor Boris Johnson has called cowardly, pathetic and utterly pointless. And that is the torching of the Islamic Centre in Muswell Hill. It has been there for years. Lots of members of the Muslim community who live nearby say they pretty much grew up there. They used to go there for all sorts of community activities. It was a friendly place, a peaceful place, certainly not a hotbed of radicalism. Dr. Usama Hussain is from the counter-extremism think tank, the Quilliam Foundation, and spoke to Penny and Paul earlier this morning.
This is quite a worrying escalation. What we need now is calm and an effective response to things like this. If it's proved that groups are inciting hatred and violence, actually, then there is a case for them to be banned. But more broadly, we need a proper conversation and dialogue between people on the Muslim side and on the right wing. You know, that's the only way I can see of solving this situation.
Well, that's what this programme is all about, really, isn't it? A dialogue. That's what it's about. So it would be extremely helpful to everybody to get your views on this one. If you are a Muslim living in London, and of course we have the highest concentration of Muslims higher than any other city in the country here in London. If you are a Muslim living in London, what has your experience been? Is Andrew Gilligan right that this all these comments about Islamophobia have been hugely exaggerated? Actually, it's not true and community relations have not broken down? or is he wrong? And do you agree with Tell Mama that there's an unprecedented level of hostility, a spike of aggression? What do you think? What is your experience? Whoever you are, whatever your age, male or female, we would love to hear from you. It's only that way that we can get a kind of picture of what's going on in London. So I would so appreciate the call. It's 0207 224 2000. Very, very simple. You ring that number, 0207 224 2000. We've got lovely people on the phones today. In fact, extra people on the phones because it's a big story. The torching of this well-loved community centre in Muswell Hill. Of course it is. Destruction right in our midst here, and the mayor saying, utterly pointless. And I wonder whether you think, though, a point has been made. Maybe you don't think it was pointless. 0207 224 2000. Call the number. They answer the phone. They have a quick chat with you, and then they call you back. And that's how it works. You end up on the radio pretty speedily. So it would be great to speak to you. Let's ask Asghar Bukhari, Muslim Public Affairs Committee. Hello, Asghar. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
So what is your response to this? I mean, how seriously do you take it? What do you take it to mean or to signify?
Very serious. I mean, it's not the. I mean, although this one is burnt to the ground, there's been, I think, over 10 attacks on mosques around the country, and I think in your report earlier on, you said well over 100 incidents reported across the UK, and it shows kind of drip of demonisation and hatred against the Muslim communities spilling over into physical acts of violence. And so you're going to have to forgive me because there's a tannoy going on, and I'm in court. But in short. It kind of shows that society or elements of society are now blaming all Muslims for an act of some Muslims, which is so strange and so ludicrous. It's almost like Jimmy Savile did something, and let's just blame all white people. I mean, you would think it was madness, but that's how it comes across when it happens in reverse.
But I could say that you're effectively doing a similar thing, because you're saying it seems as if everybody is blaming all Muslims, and I would say no, that's not it. A very tiny percentage of the greater community seem to be holding all Muslims responsible, but most people don't feel that way and wouldn't dream of doing anything of that kind. Let's be fair.
Forgive me. I'm not saying everyone, but I do believe, and we've yet to see. I do believe, right, that a growing proportion of Britain is starting to have resentment, and then I don't think it's out of the blue. I think there's a drip of headlines that create this, and right-wing groups that stoke it. That is starting to see Muslims as the other, as alien, and the attacks that you see across the country echo this. I mean, that type of widespread attack on a community just because of what some members of Britain have done, it shows that it's festering and it's growing.
I suppose, though, for some people watching this dreadful footage of what went on in Woolwich, and we heard the suspected killer, as we have to call him, saying, I'm sorry that women and children will have to watch this, but this is what women and children have to watch in my country. We find out the guy was born in Lewisham, for goodness sake. It's all done in the name of Islam, isn't it? It's the religion is evoked and invoked and seems to be the precipitating cause for the crime. That's what the suspected criminals say. That's how it's perceived. And in this particular case, the actual execution of the crime, the manner of the killing, with the machete and the cleaver and the blood dripping down the hands and all of that kind of thing, is something the like of which we've never seen, we've barely even heard about in this country. So it feels in every way horrifying, repellent, and somehow inextricably linked with Islam, because that's exactly what the killers set out to do, isn't it?
No, I think I get your point, and I think this is really, really interesting point. Now, I wish I was able to explain more to non-Muslims out there. Look, right, the reason why people believe it's Islam, and there is an element, and I'll explain it, right, is because Muslim leaders and the government have particularly almost played down why it's really happening. And why it's really happening, and remember, the killers themselves made it very, very clear, right, even though they said, Allahu Akbar, God is great, before doing the act, they actually said, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. This is happening in our countries, i.e., it's the barbaric policies that are kind of oppressing and killing hundreds of thousands of people right around the world that is having this blowback effect, this kind of enraging across the Muslim world. Now, yes, there is an Islamic element, because Islam in the Quran does not say turn the other cheek. Islam says in the Quran that if you see oppression, fight it, stop it. And so there's the Islamic justification, stop oppression. But the root cause is oppression. It's not Islam. And because the government can't say it's their foreign policy that's causing this, and Muslim leaders are too worried about either losing their funding or coming across as, being labelled as Islamist or whatever else kind of, propaganda terms they want to put out there. Everyone's pretty quiet about this issue.
So let me ask you. So Asghar, you're saying categorically on the radio that you think that the killing of John Lee Rigby was caused by British foreign policy, are you?
Absolutely. There's no doubt about it. That's the root reason of the cause, and the killers themselves have said it. And in fact, they're not the only ones. When you go back to Boston, they say the same thing. They don't say British foreign policy, but they talk about American foreign policy.
So does that mean? Wait a second. Does that mean that you see British as oppressors? You think that we are oppressors, do you?
Britain is you're talking about the people. If you're talking about the government policy and is it oppressive, there's no doubt, statistically, scientifically, cut it how you will, there's no doubt that it is destroying the lives of millions of people. 500,000 children were killed in Iraq by sanctions alone, and Britain was part of that policy.
You see,
if we talk about...
Sorry to interrupt you again, but we do have to go to the travel in a minute, so I have to ask you pretty speedily. So some people will think, if you think of the British, of us, because we are British, and probably you're British yourself, of British people and the British government as oppressors, and therefore you think that this is an oppressive country under an oppressive regime, people will be thinking, why then would you continue to live here? Why would you live here among people that you don't respect, being governed by a government that you consider to be kind of violent oppressors? Why would anyone do that? Even if you were born here, if you fundamentally disagree with the regime, just like people who lived in South Africa, white South Africans who thought apartheid was disgusting, they upped and left, and most of them were only allowed to take about threepence with them. They weren't allowed to take their money or their worldly goods with them, but they didn't approve on ideological grounds of the way the government was conducting itself, and they left. Lots of them came here. If you really don't like it, why don't you leave? I think people will be wondering, rather than stay here, live here, and talk about this government as an oppressive force, and then, like the killers in Woolwich, attempt to wreak havoc, destruction, and utter misery from within. I mean, it's such a mind-boggling thing to do, isn't it?
Fine. Okay, that can be answered very quickly in 2 points. One, Martin Luther King felt that the government in America was oppressive to black people. Why didn't he just leave and go back to Africa? Or should he change that government to be better and more humane? The second point to answer that point, Seamus Milne in The Guardian echoes everything that I've said, that it's foreign policy, and wrote about it. Where is he supposed to go? Pakistan? He's a white English person. So it's always easy to go. If you don't like evil being spread around the world, just go away. Go hide in a cave. Or maybe good men stand up in a society and say, this is a wrong, we need to change it and make it better.
But I would say that people will be gasping at the enormity of your mentioning Martin Luther King, who was entirely about peace and peaceful protest, in the same breath as the suspected killers, as I have to call them, in Woolwich, because their methods, their ideology, every single thing distinguishes them as entirely different from one another, doesn't it?
Their reason is oppression. So if you say Martin Luther King, look across Malcolm X, look at Nelson Mandela, who took up violence. What they did is wrong, but their reason is still oppression. And there's the problem. British, some people within Britain, because as I've mentioned, many people in Britain echo what I'm saying, that it is foreign policy. Some people in Britain want to bury their heads and say, well, if you say that we're murdering people abroad and propping up dictators and sending drones to kill innocent people abroad, then get out of our country. You're just evil. Wrong. The policy is evil, and it is creating an evil backlash, and that's what we have to address. And pretending that our policies are not doing that.
But I wonder whether the emphasis on the evil backlash is entirely fair, because you seem to be ignoring the killing itself. It is the killing in Woolwich, if anything, that has created the evil backlash, as you call it, and you seem to be justifying the killing in Woolwich by saying that it's a way of rising up against the giant oppressors, which is the British government and all that they suffer. I'm afraid I've got to go to the travel, Asghar, but thank you very much indeed for talking to us. Asghar Bukhari there from the Muslim Public Affairs Committee. You heard what he said. We'll clip some of it and replay it for you so that you can be absolutely sure that we're quoting him precisely. What is your response to what he said? 0207 224 2000. Time for the travel.
And with the travel news, I'm Paul Murphy. On the anti-clockwise M25, one lane stays closed following yesterday's incident near junction 15. That's the M4. Queues back to 21 for the M1. The lane 1 is shut by 15, and that's while they take apart the cherry picker that was involved in yesterday's incident. Also clockwise, queuing after a vehicle broke down near junction 5. Queues back to junction 2A. That's the A20. Long delays through the area, and also queues back along the M26. The North Circular in New Southgate, part blocked after that collision near towards the Bounds Green junction towards Coney Hatch. Queues back towards the A10 in Edmonton. On the A40 through Perivale, queuing eastbound after that collision involving a car and a motorbike. That was at the Medway underpass. Congestion back towards Long Lane. M1 northbound pretty heavy between 10 and 11. That's Luton to Dunstable following a crash that's now on the side of the road. In Beckenham, Southend Road, still part blocked at Coperscote Road following a crash. And we've still got delays on the tube because of a signal failure at Barbican earlier on. The Circle Line still has severe delays, the Hammersmith and City Line still has severe delays, and the Metropolitan Line now running with minor delays Baker Street to Aldgate. Paul Murphy, BBC London 94.9. Your next update's just after 1:30.
This is BBC London 94.9.
I tell you, I'm not sure that my brain is fully engaged this morning. You can make your decision on that over the course of the next couple of hours.
Early breakfast with Harriet Scott.
It's a bleak future.
There might be a different way. I'm working on it.
It's a good start. It's a positive start.
Weekdays from 4.
You've moved the topic on in a good way, and I thank you for that.
Often they call it the nanny state. I don't call it the nanny state, I call it the mummy state.
The Early Breakfast Show.
Have you ever driven a really fast car?
Yes, it wasn't meant to be. It was an Austin Maxi. It wasn't supposed to get up to that speed.
With Harriet Scott.
Thank you so much for your call.
Thank you.
Always a pleasure. Goodbye.
BBC London 94.9.
So I wonder if you're responding to our first guest on the programme. I mean, you heard what he said. I certainly don't need to put words in his mouth, but he talked of rising up against your oppressors. The British government are oppressors. He felt that what happened in Woolwich was 100% a response to British foreign policy, regardless of what people, including Boris Johnson and David Cameron, have said about it, which is that it had nothing at all to do with British foreign policy. Let's bring in Bill in Lewisham, who was listening avidly to what the guest said. Hello, Bill.
Good morning to you, Vanessa.
Yeah, what do you make of that, then?
Well, I was ringing up to begin with, before your guests had come on, to say that in Lewisham, where you've already mentioned that one of the alleged murderers is now said to have been born,
Yep.
At the weekend, 36 different faith leaders got together to put their handprint on a cloth to show their combined support for all the different faiths in the London Borough of Lewisham.
Yeah.
And it was very great to see all the leaders get together. 30 faith leaders, I'm sure you will agree, is quite a lot of the Lewisham Borough community. And that was done to show the support. Having just heard your speech, I have to say I'm a little aghast at some of the things that he said, because he's entitled to his opinion, as is everybody else. To say that the oppression is caused by the government, which are voted for by the people of that country, any country, and to take that view, I have to say, in my opinion, it gives tantamount to the reasons why certain people take matters into their own hands, which obviously is totally wrong and shouldn't happen.
I mean,
I'm surprised that that person is put forward to represent the Islamic movement, because I think he's done himself and their movement certainly more harm than good.
I mean, we did have Mayor Boris Johnson and the Prime Minister saying categorically that what happened in... We did have Mayor Boris Johnson and the Prime Minister saying categorically that what happened in Woolwich had nothing to do with our foreign policy. That's what they said. And then my guest just now said that was not true at all. I think we've lost Bill in Lewisham. All right, let's go to Paula in Harrow. Hello, Paula. Good morning.
Hello. Sorry, I'm really nervous. And this topic creates such a downer on everybody. The problem that we have, that I have personally, I speak personally, the opinion I have a lot, because I've got 4 children, I'm in Harrow, there's a lot of Muslims in Harrow, I work for Muslims, I'm a curtain maker, everything goes on. The problem I have is I now look at them in a different way. Now, whether that's me, my opinion or anything, I now suddenly look at them and think, do they really hate us? You know, is that what they're thinking about me? Is that they have a thought on my kids? You know, and all that. And it's just the guy that you had on because I was in the car. I've just come. You know, he was on about the foreign policy he doesn't like. Well, he seems to like other policies. Why focus on just that policy? What about the policy that allows the Muslim community to open up in Muswell Hill? That was a policy that obviously has gone through, and they've put that up. We're not a Muslim country, but we're very tolerant. I find that England is very tolerant. We try, we work, we try to involve everybody. Now, the Muslim community thing that went up in flames, that's really bad. Don't get me wrong. But how worse would it have been if they'd dragged a Muslim out, beheaded him in front of everybody in the street? It would have been an uproar. Now, you can't say that it is an uproar. And for a guy to do that under the name of Allah, whatever God, you can't do that. You can't. It's just like we wouldn't like that any white British person to go into that mosque, drag somebody out and behead him in the street. It's disgusting. And you can put a banner under it, under Muslim, under Judaism, under Christianity, under anybody. That is disgusting. And I tell you what, the guy should be looking at all the Muslim people and look within themselves and say, this is unacceptable. Because I'm telling you now, if that happened, a white person done that to a Muslim, I know in my community, speaking on behalf of me, I would be looking and saying that is disgusting, and I never want my son to ever think that's acceptable.
But let's be fair, Paula, that is what the vast majority of the Muslim population of this country has said, and said immediately. I mean, let's be fair about this. You know, a whole welter of imams and spokespeople and members of the community immediately said, we are horrified. This is disgusting. This is not Islam. This is not what Muhammad the Prophet would have wanted. This is disgraceful, despicable. We are so sorry. We distance ourselves from it. They did say that. The Muslim community did come forward and say that. Let's be fair, Paula, because it isn't true that they didn't. They most certainly did, and very quickly too, and very, very vocally.
Yes, but that's what they've said. I don't believe that they actually believe it. They've said it because that's what they think we want to hear. But deep down, when I look at Muslim people now, who I called friends, colleagues, everything, I'm actually looking at them in a completely different light.
But why?
I don't look at them because I think to myself, is that what they're thinking? Are they supporting that guy? Under the name of Allah, like you've just said, like we've just listened to with the foreign policy, it's our fault, we've brought it on ourselves. We are not a Muslim country. If your spokesman for the Muslim community, they're probably thinking, really, we should be in a Muslim country, but they're not. They're not in a Muslim country. So why is this happening? Do you know what? I brought my kids up to accept everybody. My mum's Jewish, my dad's Christian, everything. Right? This is and to have somebody on the thing saying, "Oh, you know what it is? It's our foreign policy, and it's almost our fault." It's disgusting. He should have been there saying, "It doesn't matter what our foreign policy is. That is unacceptable. We have a democratic society, we can vote. There's a lot of, like you say, there's a lot of Muslims in London. We can vote. This is unacceptable. I can't believe that anybody could come on there and say that. I have 4 children. I would be disgusted if they had any part or said to me, do you know what, I agree with them.
Let me just interrupt to say one thing. Do you remember how many British people and how many Londoners of all different colours, all different ethnicities marched on the anti-war march? How many people listening to this programme will agree, whether they're Muslim or not, that they don't approve of British foreign policy? Lots of people will find it completely acceptable to say that. In fact, they will say they opposed intervention in Iraq. They opposed the war. They're still opposed to it. The weapons of mass destruction were never found. The whole thing was a complete disaster and continues to be. So many of our wonderful brave soldiers have lost their lives. People, lots of people who are not Muslim would agree with him in terms of being against British foreign policy. And it's not sacrilege to say so. You're allowed to say so. It is a democracy.
No. I didn't say it was. I didn't say he disagreed. You can disagree with it. I disagree with the war. I disagree with a lot of things this government do, and I disagree with a lot of the Labour. They're all just cloned people in suits, just mouthing off little snippets of information that they think we want to hear. That's nothing to do with it. This is the fact that some kid was killed in the streets in this country. That's what it boils down to. Whether it's a foreign policy or anything. It doesn't matter.
Paula, I'm going to thank you for your passion and thank you for the call. I can see that you mean every word that you said with absolute, complete sort of fervour, just as, of course, our first guest, Asghar Bukhari, meant every word that he said. The question, I suppose, lovely listeners, where do you stand on this? I'll just briefly read you this before the news. Please don't read out my name. I work in an East London borough with a high population of Muslim residents. I can tell you for a fact that there has been a most definite increase of reported crimes which are flagged as Islamophobic since Lee Rigby was so brutally murdered. They range from verbals, assaults and criminal damage. In my opinion, these people committing these acts are using the Woolwich event as justification for their actions, and they have the misguided belief that the average white man on the street agrees with them. It's like they've been given a pass to be more openly Islamophobic, and they think people will empathise with them. I don't think this is the case at all. Most sensible people can appreciate that we are all individuals, and the radicalised men who attack Lee Rigby are most certainly not the face of most Muslims. Where are you on this? Please do call, because if you don't, we won't know how you feel. 0207 224 2000, and it's time for the news headlines.
Good morning. Police say they're doing all they can to catch whoever burnt down a Somali community centre in Muswell Hill in a suspected arson attack. It comes as the Muslim Council of Britain calls on the Met Commissioner to take serious action to stop anti-Islamic attacks in the wake of the murder of soldier Lee Rigby in Woolwich. Figures released by the government's equality watchdog suggest the gap between the number of black and white people who are stopped and searched by the Met has narrowed slightly. 3 years ago, 4.6 black people were stopped for every white person, but last year that ratio fell to 4-1. The Equality and Human Rights Commission says the police have got fairer in their use of stop and search, but still have a lot of work to do. Nick Clegg has blocked Conservative plans to allow nursery staff and childminders to look after more children on the grounds that it could have actually ended up costing parents more. The Tories said their proposals would have reduced the cost of childcare, but the idea was widely criticised by parents and childcare providers. Conservatives in Barnet have voted to expel the borough's former mayor Brian Coleman from their association following his conviction for common assault. Last month, the 51-year-old pleaded guilty to attacking a cafe owner who'd filmed him parking illegally in Finchley High Road, where he'd helped to introduce unpopular parking charges. And Transport for London has set a new target to reduce deaths and serious injuries on the capital's roads by a further 40% by 2020. It's launching a 7-year plan, including the extension of trial schemes like the 20-mile-an-hour speed limit at the Waterloo roundabout. London's weather, dry and sunny and a bit warmer than yesterday, with top temperatures of 24 Celsius, 75 Fahrenheit.
And with the travel news here on BBC London 94.9, I'm Paul Murphy. The anti-clockwise M25, one lane stays closed following yesterday's incident near junction 15. That's the M4. Lane 1 remains closed, and that's while they dismantle the cherry picker that was involved. Queues back to junction 21 for the M1, adding to the usual Hertfordshire stretch delays, and it's taking about an hour or so to get through. Clockwise, one lane is closed after a vehicle overturned 18 to 19, Chorleywood to Watford. In the city near Holborn, Newgate Street is closed westbound between Cheapside, which is St Paul Station, and Snow Hill, and that's because of a demonstration going on by the EDL outside the Old Bailey. The Old Bailey as well, or Old Bailey itself, is closed northbound from Ludgate Hill up towards Giltspur Street, and it's going to remain shut until 7 o'clock tomorrow evening. In Beckenham, Southend Road is part blocked at Coperscote Road following a collision. The M1 northbound, there's a collision on the hard shoulder 10 to 11, Luton to Dunstable. Traffic's pretty slow. On the Watford Road in Kenton, the A404, there are queues approaching the temporary lights and the burst water main at Pebworth Road near Northwick Park Hospital. Queues back towards the Sheepcote Road junction. The A40 heading into town from the Western Avenue through Perivale. There's a crash near towards the Medway underpass with queues back to Long Lane. On the Tube, Circle and Hammersmith and City lines both have severe delays. That's after that signal failure at Barbican, and the Metropolitan line now down to minor delays. If you can update us, give us a call 0207 224 2000, or you can tweet at BBC Travel Alert. Paul Murphy, BBC London 94.9. Your next update's just before 10.
BBC London 94.9.
Vanessa Feltz.
Call 020 722 42000.
So you may have heard my guest, Asghar Bukhari of the Muslim Public Affairs Committee. We will certainly play back for you a clip of most of what he said, just to make sure that I don't misquote him and you hear accurately from the man himself what his response was. We're talking primarily about the torching of the Islamic Centre in Muswell Hill, condemned by Mayor Boris Johnson as cowardly, pathetic and utterly pointless. There's an article by Andrew Gilligan saying actually there are fewer reprisals and hate crimes against Muslims than there were after 7/7, and that it reports of the proliferation and a spike in hatred is exaggerated. However, that was not confirmed by one of my listeners who works in a force whereby they have access to knowledge about this and says actually there is an increase, certainly. Let's talk to Sahana in the city. Hi, Sahana. Morning.
Hi.
What do you think about this?
I'm a little bit surprised that the gentleman that blamed the foreign policy, every time he talks about foreign policy and blames that as a result, the actions, though they were wrong, it's a result of that the government have occupied several countries and yada, yada, yada. Every time a Muslim talks about that, the first thing that a non-Muslim tends to turn around and say is justifications for it.
Is what? Sorry, what? Say that again? I can't hear you because you're cutting out every other word or so. Say that again.
Sorry. Someone mentions a foreign policy and uses that as a means to explain why that happened, and that needs to be resolved before you can look at anything else. Yeah. Generally speaking, when a Muslim talks about that, every single non-Muslim that listens, the automatic response is you're making up excuses. You're in some way that we say, when that's not the case at all.
So what is the case?
The case is the government not to answer for. As much as it was wrong what those guys did, and as you mentioned previously, a lot of Muslims, including imams, people that are in the media a lot, yada, 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 have condemned it and spoken about the fact that it's completely and utterly wrong. And talk about, let's tackle the issue. And the root cause is things like Afghanistan war, all the wars of mass destruction and yada, 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 all this stuff. That is the root cause. And as soon as we mention it, everyone then hypes on and talks about the fact that we're in some way applauding or not discussing or even saying in any level that it was wrong what those guys did. Everyone agrees that it was wrong what they did.
I'm not absolutely sure that Asghar Bukhari said it was wrong. I mean, we'll play back the conversation, and I'm not certain he said that it was wrong. You see, the point is as soon as you start to say it's caused by foreign policy, it gives it credence because it implies that there is a justification. You see, if anyone ever tries to explain and justify racism, you know they can't. There is no justification for racism. You can't say, oh yes, Vanessa, well, you know, anti-Semitism is caused by this, or Islamophobia is caused by this. You can't give an explanation. There is no explanation for racism. Racism has no justification. You can't justify it. But as soon as you start to say the killing of Drummer Lee Rigby was the explanation is the cause is British foreign policy, then you're implying that there is a cause and there is a reason, aren't you?
But there is a reason, there is a cause. That doesn't mean to say that it warrants that behaviour. There was, I'll give you another example. If you sit and poke me constantly for an hour and then in the end I give you a slap back, is my behaviour right? I've still given you back double what you've given me, but you've provoked the situation. You've created a platform for me to give you a slap back, and that's exactly what's going on. I have basically carried out an act in retaliation to something that they feel strongly about. So by explaining that there is a cause, and that cause is what the government are doing, is not turning around and saying that what those guys did was correct in any form, but you can understand their feeling. What they did is completely and utterly wrong outside of Islam, but you can understand why there is that frustration. There are videos on YouTube. I'll give you another example. It's a video on YouTube of a Sikh guy. Not Muslim, he's Sikh. He clarifies, he's wearing a turban, he clarifies the fact that he's not Muslim. He goes on YouTube and says, although he disagrees with what they've done, he understands why they've done it because he's a soldier of war. And he says there is no masses of destruction, it's all lies, and hence the reason why people are resulting in carrying out barbaric, insane acts. I mean, clearly there's an element of insanity in those two guys who kill someone and then
I think you've hit on a point that lots of people will be longing for you to get to, which is, if there's an element, as you say, of insanity, if it is insane to attempt to eviscerate, first mow down with a car and then eviscerate using a meat cleaver, an innocent man who was only doing his job and who is, utterly undeserving of any kind of hostility or aggression whatsoever. If it is insane, then it's insane. And it's not connected with British foreign policy or anything else. It's radicalism to the point of insanity. And you use the word insane. I appreciate the call enormously. Thank you for ringing. Do keep the calls coming in. This is a short clip of Asghar Bukhari this morning. We will give you a longer chunk of what he said shortly.
The government have particularly almost played down why it's really happening. And why it's really happening, and remember, the killers themselves made it very, very clear, right? Even though they said, Allahu Akbar, God is great, before doing the act, they actually said, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. This is happening in our countries, i.e., it's the barbaric policies that are kind of oppressing and killing hundreds of thousands of people right around the world that is having this blowback effect, this kind of enraging across the Muslim world. Now, yes, there is an Islamic element, because Islam in the Quran does not say turn the other cheek. Islam says in the Quran that if you see oppression, fight it, stop it.
That's Asghar Bukhari of the Muslim Public Affairs Committee. There's been a massive response to what he said. We're taking your calls on this. If you want to contact me any other way, you can email vanessa@bbc.co.uk. There's our text message, which is 81333, 81333, and start your message with the word London. Facebook is facebook.com/The Vanessa Show. You can tweet us at Vanessa on Air. But BBC London 94.9's Jonathan Savage is in Muswell Hill now. Hello, Jonathan. Good morning.
Good morning, Vanessa. And certainly as you arrive here, before you see the burnt-out community centre, the first thing you see, reaching right up into those gorgeous blue skies, 200, 300 feet in the air, is an enormous crane, which was brought here yesterday afternoon in the wake of this fire. And at the moment it stands as a symbol of how much changed so quickly for this community, which has been stirred by this horrific attack. Right down underneath that crane, of course, is this charred black husk of what used to be the Somalian Community Centre. It's surrounded by scaffolding and many construction workers who are working to make it safe and utterly dismantle and take what's left of it away. In front of that, a police cordon with half a dozen or so police officers just standing on essentially sentry duty this morning. Walking up and down this busy road where we've seen many young families on their way to school, many people on their way to work, but also people just walking up to the cordon to have a look and see what's going on up there, because, as I said, this area changed very dramatically over the course of one night. The community is rallying round. I've been told this morning that the local church and the local Jewish organisation are getting in contact with the Somali community and offering them their spaces, their church halls, for example, to attempt to allow the Somali community the chance to perform their functions as they otherwise would. So certainly very encouraging to hear that. Among the people who have walked up to the cordon this morning to see and talk to each other and discuss what has been happening in this part of Muswell Hill are Margie and Mark. I spoke to them a few moments ago.
Well, I've lived here for many years and it's become more and more, more...
multicultural.
Yes, multicultural. But I welcome that because I'm not from here either. I've lived here for nearly 50 years, originally from South Africa.
It's a nice place, very vibrant. Lots of women and children there, particularly on Sundays. And something like this, it just makes you sad and angry, doesn't it? It's just a senseless waste.
Do you think tensions are rising, or is it just a few mindless idiots?
Mindless idiots. It's very harmonious around here. I mean, Braven East Centre's been there for longer than I've lived here, which is 10 years, and it's an integral part of the community, So no, there's no tension here. It's just mindless idiots, a senseless minority, I think.
That's certainly how most people appear to be reacting to it, Vanessa. One little further sidebar to this. Someone else told me this morning that fires were already on the mind of the community here over the last few days, that there was a fairly significant fire in the nearby Coldfall Woods where a large chunk of plastic caused quite a lot of damage to itself and to the trees around it, which certainly got people talking and wondering how that managed to get alight, and then this community centre getting alight just a few days later.
Well, thank you very much indeed. That's Jonathan Savage there for BBC London 94.9. This is from Debbie, who says, I am gobsmacked, Vanessa. That gentleman has probably just undone any good that had been done by the Muslim leaders and clerics that have distanced themselves from the dreadful events in Woolwich. If he's an example of what Muslims truly believe, it scares me. There is so much more trouble ahead. Dave said, on the other hand, he made perfect sense. Vanessa, you know full well that agreeing on a motive for a crime is not excusing it. If a killer says he did it because in his mind he was angry about something, you have to accept it. It's what he said. We have killed hundreds of thousands of Muslims, so it's no surprise that some of them have got pretty upset about it. Jim in West London. The EDL Jewish division reported yesterday that out of all the people arrested in Luton for starting fires, 26 were Muslim. Call me sceptical, but it's possible Muslims are starting these fires to divide Londoners even more. Well, that seems like a conspiracy theory. Anyway, straight after this, we'll be back with Cheryl in Shepherd's Bush.
This is BBC London 94.9.
Are you a middle lane hogger?
Of course not. BBC London 94.9 Breakfast.
If you went into a room with 1,000 drivers and asked that question, not one of them will put up their hand.
With Penny Smith and Paul Ross.
I think we should all go on a sort of written test.
Yeah.
I think we should all do that.
And then a car cuts in. I drop back.
Yes,
I get
indeed.
annoyed, but nevertheless, I do drop back.
You
should know by now, Edmund, that Penny Smith is emerging as the Mary Poppins of the motorway.
BBC London 94.9 Breakfast.
I think all the travel bulletins that you do should perhaps end in and keep left unless you're overtaken.
They're not bad thoughts.
Except difficult that in the run-up to a general election because it might be construed as political bias.
Oh, shut up. Weekdays from 6.
And Roland describes himself as despairing in London. He says, wow, what a way to start the show. Perhaps I'm just a softie inside and essentially want to see as much good as possible in everyone. But with your Muslim public affairs spokesman, I think we might have been misinterpreting him. It sounded like he was more talking semantics, i.e. the controllers of these two young men felt they were trying to right wrongs they perceived in the country's foreign policy. So from that point of view, it can't be said that the killing had nothing to do with it. However, I don't think he came across as justifying the attack. His rhetoric did seem to get more harsh when talking about some of the downsides of military action across the world, but I don't think he was saying that they were right to take such action. Perhaps he should have said something like they should have joined the established political avenues to try and influence policy, etc. However, I'd like to think that that is the sort of thing that he meant. Now, you know, he said that foreign policy, British foreign policy, was the cause of what happened in Woolwich, the Woolwich killings. Well, Boris Johnson, the day after the killing, said neither Islam nor UK foreign policy are to blame for the Woolwich attack. This is exactly what the mayor said the day after. He said it was wrong to blame Muslims or the presence of UK troops in Afghanistan for the attack. He said one obvious point, these are his exact words, it is completely wrong to blame this killing on Islam, but also wrong to draw a link between this murder and British foreign policy. The fault lies with the warped mindset of those who did it, and for the sake of the victim and his family, the killers need to be brought to justice. So if it is a warped mindset, then you can't link it to a kind of justifiable cause or explanation. If it's insanity or sadistic kind of cruelty, then that's what it is. Let's go to Cheryl in Shepherd's Bush. Hi, Cheryl. Morning.
Hello, Vanessa. Good morning.
Morning. What do you think? I mean, it's so terribly sad to see this Islamic centre burn to the ground. You know, it's been a peaceful place. People have enjoyed going there. You know, in The Guardian, people are quoted as saying they pretty much grew up there. You know, really big local resource that people really liked. And now we have this you know, kicking off on the programme today. Where would you stand on all of this?
Yeah, and I mean, on that point, if we're a civilised nation, then of course that's not civilised. That's not something we should be doing. But having said that, I myself, I'm not a Muslim. I'm a Roman Catholic. But I do think that these people have a right to be angry and they've got a right to retaliate. We are all over the world in their countries killing millions of people. Do we not expect some sort of retaliation? That's my point. And of course I don't agree with what this guy done in Woolwich. It's absolutely horrendous. But what we're doing in Iraq, Afghanistan, is absolutely horrendous as well. Like people have said, children are dying. You know, this guy didn't go out and kill children. He apologised to women and children for having to witness it. He didn't kill any children or any women. He's fighting a cause. He's fighting back. You know, why are we in their countries? We've got so many problems of our own.
You say their countries, but the suspected killer was born in Lewisham and lives in this country and is British and as British as anybody else and a Londoner through and through, as you could hear when you heard his accent when he was speaking, talking about your country and my country. This is his country.
He said Muslim lands. I don't think he said my country. I think he said Muslim lands. We're all over the Muslim land. You know, being Iraq, Afghanistan, you know, what are we doing there? And are we not? We like to label these people terrorists. We love doing that. And to me, that's all, we call them terrorists for a reason. What are we then? If we're going over to these countries, killing millions upon millions of people, what are we? Are we not causing terror?
Do you really? I mean, where do you get the information that we have killed millions upon millions of people?
Well,
that's a gross exaggeration, isn't it? What's actually
happened?
Well,
I think maybe not over the past few years.
Millions and millions of people. That's not correct, is it? We'll check on the number of people, but and isn't there not a tremendous difference between being part of a? I mean, I know the word war is not always a word that goes over well, but part of a conflict which is kind of ratified by the United Nations now, etc., and so forth, and is joined in with by a collection of other countries with whom we're in accord. And the idea is supposed to be, isn't it, to leave? I mean, theoretically, at any rate, to leave the country in a more stable state than it was in when we arrived. That's meant to be the aim, isn't it?
Our own country is not stable. We've got an NHS system where people are dying daily through not being treated correctly. We've got so many problems.
That's also a gross exaggeration. We've got an NHS system where most people are very, very well dealt with and are leaving with a collection of exactly what they need: the right antibiotics, the right operation, speedy.
Vanessa, I think we've seen and heard enough stories about the NHS very recently as well, which, our NHS is in trouble. We've got so many other problems of our own in our own country. It's none of our business. What goes on in other countries is none of our business. Who are we to dip into their countries and say, look, this is how you should do it? You're not allowed to do this, you're not allowed to do that, and we're going to come and kill a load of you to make sure it doesn't make any sense.
I don't know, Cheryl, if people will agree with your assessment, but let's see. We'll see whether they do. Thanks for the call. Let's see. Let's talk to Laura in East Grinstead. Hello, Laura.
Hi, Vanessa.
Hi.
I'm worried that your guest was misquoted, if you like.
Well, he was speaking, so he can only, anything he said is what he said.
Yeah,
nobody was editing it. So that's why we're going to give you a big clip of it pretty soon, as soon as it's ready, so you can hear again for yourself exactly what he said, because I certainly don't want to put words into the mouth of somebody who was speaking for himself.
At the end of his call, you summed up what he said, and then obviously you had to leave to go to the news and travel, and in that summary, you didn't make it clear that he said what those two men did in Woolwich was wrong. And, he clearly said that. He was looking, in my interpretation, for reasons for their act. He didn't agree with their act, but he was looking for reasons for their act, which surely is a sensible thing to do. As you said yourself, thousands of people marched in opposition to the war in Iraq.
Yes.
Of all parts of the community.
Yes.
And, they said it themselves that was their reason. We can look at other reasons that might go alongside that. The fact that they converted from Christianity to Islam. Were they attracted by the extreme, as many people are saying, non-true Muslim part of the religion, if you like?
But you do realise, and we all must realise, that we live in a democracy and we live in a country governed by law, and therefore, if you object to something, if you object to a government you think are oppressive, you have all sorts of legal ways of trying to, put your point of view and trying to make sure that this government doesn't get re-elected. You don't take to the streets with a meat cleaver and kill somebody. So the basic bottom line is it's entirely unjustifiable. To look for the root cause of something that's unjustifiable is an idiot's mission, isn't it? Because you're not going to find a root cause for bludgeoning down a soldier and then attempting to eviscerate. And people thought that the witnesses at the scene thought that they were trying to remove his entrails. I mean, for God's sake. So to try and justify it, to find a cause for that kind of behaviour, the whole point of living in this country is there's never a justification for behaving like that. We don't take the law into our own hands in any way. That's not what we're about. I tell you what, Laura, listen to him, because we're going to replay it so that everyone can hear exactly what he said. And then, of course, I'll come back to you if you don't mind holding on, and we'll see whether what you think when you've had another chance to listen to him. His name is Asghar Bukhari. We're speaking to him this morning following the torching of the Islamic Centre in Muswell Hill, and he represents the Muslim Public Affairs Committee.
And remember, the killers themselves made it very, very clear, right? Even though they said, Allahu Akbar, God is great, before doing the act, they actually said, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. This is happening in our countries, i.e., it's the barbaric policies that are kind of oppressing and killing hundreds of thousands of people right around the world that is having this blowback effect, this kind of enraging across the Muslim world. Now, yes, there is an Islamic element, because Islam in the Quran does not say turn the other cheek. Islam says in the Quran that if you see oppression, fight it, stop it. And so there's the Islamic justification, stop oppression. But the root cause is oppression. It's not Islam. And because the government can't say it's their foreign policy that's causing this, and Muslim leaders are too, worried about either losing their funding or coming across as, being labelled as Islamist or whatever else kind of, propaganda terms they want to put out there. Everyone's pretty quiet about this issue.
So let me ask you. So Asghar, you're saying categorically on the radio that you think that the killing of John Lee Rigby was caused by British foreign policy, are you?
Absolutely. There's no doubt about it. That's the root reason of the cause, and the killers themselves have said it. And in fact, they're not the only ones. When you go back to Boston, they say the same thing. They don't say British foreign policy, but they talk about American foreign policy.
So does that mean? Just wait a second. Does that mean that you see British as oppressors? You think that we are oppressors, do you?
Britain is you're talking about the people. If you're talking about the government policy and is it oppressive, there's no doubt, statistically, scientifically, cut it how you will, there's no doubt that it is destroying the lives of millions of people, 500,000.
Well, Laura, there you are. That's what he said.
Yeah, I mean, you used the word justification. I didn't use the word justification. What he is looking for and what we should be looking for is what reason did those two men, apart from, I mean, we can all say that, they were delusional. I mean, it's not a strong enough word. What is the reason that they carried out their act? And they gave their reason, no matter how twisted and how wrong we all feel it is, and it is. That was their reason, and until we understand that, how can we correct it? How can we try and make sure other young men don't turn towards this extremist element of I don't want to call it Islam or Muslim, because I'm speaking to so many Islamic friends, they don't feel that it's connected with their religion, but that is what he was saying. That was their reasoning. That's the reasoning they give. Many of us are against the foreign policies, and yes, there are better ways of fighting it. There were better ways of fighting what happened in Woolwich, such as the temple, I can't remember where it is, and they offered tea and cakes to the EDL who were marching.
Yes, in York, absolutely.
We've got to try and get behind what happened, how our foreign policy, or many other things. I mean, probably. I
just don't know whether it's possible to find a reason in the unreasonable.
Well, yeah,
it has no reason. What did they imagine that they could possibly achieve by it? How could they justify doing something like that?
Well,
it's unjustifiable. So lots of people would say, why should we abase ourselves? And I mean everyone, Muslims, Jews, Christians, Sikhs, everybody. Why should any of us abase ourselves by attempting to fathom out a reason for something unreasonable? It was barbaric. It wasn't reasonable. There's no reason for something like that.
No, it was totally
It's
barbaric.
unreasoned. It's without reason.
What do we do? Just brush it under the carpet and turn away?
Well, of course not.
You've got the situation, I mean, not linked at all, but you had that awful situation with April Jones. Everybody's looking for a reason. Is it how much is available on the internet? We're all looking for reasons of what caused that man to turn around and do what he did, and it's the same here. You have to try and analyse it in order to try and move away from an understanding.
But of course, Laura, it's not the same at all.
No, of course it's not.
But in the case of April Jones, for example, if the cause of that man's behaviour was the proliferation of child abuse pornography and its easy availability on the internet, that kind of thing, if that was the cause, then yes, you're quite right. You can act to do something to remove the facilitator, the catalyst that makes people behave like that, if it turns out that is the reason. But in this case, that's not it. You can't move to remove the thing. What you would have to be doing, if you took what you consider to be their reasons on board, is you would have to be appeasing them. You would have to be giving, as if they were kind of, as if they were holding us all to ransom, as if they had, kidnapped your kid and were saying, give me £500,000 or the kid dies. And you'd have to give them the money. It would be that equivalent. It wouldn't be anything like the April Jones case where you would be trying to root out the catalyst and get rid of it. It would be the opposite. It would be appeasing the Woolwich killers and giving them what they want, whatever the hell that is supposed to be. Laura, thank you very much indeed. We've got to go because we're going into the news. Obviously, this has pretty much exploded as a topic. This is following the torching of... It's very sad to be saying this, isn't it, really? I'm not saying it with any kind of equanimity at all. Following the torching of the Islamic Centre in Muswell Hill. It's been there for years, a haven of peace, something very much enjoyed by the local community and all sorts of local communities, but now it's gone. And we're talking about that. The number's 0207 224 2000, and we will be back straight after the news, the travel and the weather at 10 o'clock.
And with the travel, I'm Paul Murphy. The anti-clockwise M25 one-lane stays closed following yesterday's incident near junction 15, that's the M4. The cherry picker involved is being taken apart in lane 1, so that's why the lane is shut. Queues all the way back to junction 20 for Kings Langley and taking an hour and a half to get through. Clockwise, we've also got a vehicle overturned 18 to 19, Chorleywood to Watford. Queues back to 16 for the M40. The North Circular in New Southgate, part blocked westbound. We've got a collision between Bounds Green and Coney Hatch. Queues reaching back beyond Cooks Ferry towards Chingford. On the A40 Western Avenue coming into town through Perivale, one lane is shut after a collision involving a car and a motorbike. That's at the Medway underpass with queues back to the Swakeleys roundabout in Uxbridge, taking 3/4 of an hour to get through there. In the city, Newgate Street near Holborn, closed westbound. We've got things going on between St Paul Station and Snow Hill. The EDL are demonstrating outside the Old Bailey. And as for the Old Bailey or Old Bailey itself, that's closed northbound between Ludgate Hill and Newgate Street and will be shut until 7 o'clock tomorrow evening. On the A404 Watford Road in Kenton, that's still queuing approaching Pebworth Road near Norfolk Park Hospital. That's because the temporary lights have failed and we've got repairs going on to Watermain, so queues back towards Sheepcote Road. And on the tube, because of that signal failure earlier on at Barbican, Hammersmith and City Line and Circle Line still both suffering severe delays. If you can update us, give us a call 0207 224 2000, or you can tweet at BBC Travel Alert. Paul Murphy, BBC London 94.9. Your next updates around past.
On 94.9 FM, DAB, satellite and online.
London's news, London stories.
BBC London 94.9.
London's news at 10. I'm Matthew Schofield. The Met Police Commissioner must set out how he intends to tackle a growing trend of anti-Islamic attacks, according to the Muslim Council of Britain. Since soldier Lee Rigby was killed in Woolwich a fortnight ago, mosques have been targeted, far-right groups have been protesting, and yesterday a Somali community centre in Muswell Hill was destroyed in a suspected arson attack. Asghar Bukhari from the Muslim Public Affairs Committee has told Vanessa that attack follows a depressing pattern.
I do believe a growing proportion of Britain is starting to have resentment, kind of drip of demonisation and hatred against the Muslim communities spilling over into physical acts of violence. Elements of society are now blaming all Muslims for an act of some Muslims, which is so strange and so ludicrous. It's almost like Jimmy Savile did something and let's just blame all white people. I mean, who would think it was madness?
A former prison officer from East London has become the 66th person to be arrested by detectives investigating allegations that journalists paid public officials for information. The 39-year-old was picked up at his home in Waltham Forest this morning. The gap between the number of black and white people who are stopped and searched by the Met has narrowed slightly, according to the government's equality watchdog. 3 years ago, the ratio was 4.6 black people for every white person, but last year it was 4-1, and the total number of searches has also fallen by 4%. Anna Henry from the Equality and Human Rights Commission has told BBC London 94.9 the Met has got fairer in its use of stop and search, but there's still more work to do.
As long as there's reasonable suspicion for the police to be stopping those groups of people, then it's a reasonable use of that power. What we're concerned with is excess use. If you're stopping innocent people and repeatedly for no reason whatsoever, then that's not fair on them, and actually has a real impact on the reputation of the police with certain communities, and that's not helpful to the police.
Conservatives in Barnet have voted to expel the borough's former mayor Brian Coleman from their association following his conviction for common assault. Last month, the 51-year-old pleaded guilty to attacking a cafe owner who'd filmed him parking illegally in Finchley High Road, where he'd helped to introduce unpopular parking charges. Transport for London has set itself a new target to reduce deaths and serious injuries on the roads by a further 40% by 2020. It's launching a 7-year plan, including the extension of trial schemes like the 20-mile-an-hour speed limit at the Waterloo roundabout. Garrett Emerson from TfL has told BBC London 94.9 they've been making progress in recent years, but they're determined to do better.
We're setting a new target today for a further 40% reduction. That's on the back of the significant reductions we've seen over the last 10 or 12 years. So I think it's quite a challenging target. A number of measures ranging from continuing investment in the road network through to improving driver and vehicle standards, improving the skills of the people who work across the industry.
Nick Clegg has weighed into the debate about whether the winter fuel allowance should remain universal for all pensioners. The Deputy Prime Minister says some millionaires don't need it, and he can't see why hard-working taxpayers should give them what he calls an extra free bung. Stephen Fry has admitted he tried to kill himself last year by taking pills with vodka while he was filming abroad. During an interview at a theatre in Leicester Square last night, he revealed he was found in his hotel room by a colleague. He is president of the mental health charity Mind, whose chief executive, Paul Farmer, says being open about mental health issues is important.
One of the points that Stephen is really wanting to make is to encourage people, all of us, to have a better understanding about mental illness and our own mental health. And people who experience bipolar often tell us about being able to identify those points at which they are beginning to slide down. And often they feel very isolated, but seeking help and reaching out for help really can make a difference.
The British writer Tom Sharp has died at his home on the Costa Brava at the age of 85. He wrote darkly, often outrageously comic novels, including the Wilt series, while Blot on the Landscape and Porterhouse Blue were both made into successful television series. There's been a big increase in criminals stealing bank cards, having obtained the PIN by watching customers use them at cash machines. The number of cases has trebled in a year to more than 7,500 in the first 4 months of this year. Detective Chief Inspector Dave Carter from the London-based Check and Plastic Crime Unit says many criminals now prefer that method to fitting card readers to machines.
This equipment is difficult to get hold of. It's obviously illegal to possess it. It tends to be quite high tech and therefore it's quite expensive. So it's a lot cheaper and it can be effective.
In the city a short time ago, the FTSE 100 was up 5 points at 64.24. Now Elizabeth Rizzini has London's weather.
Thank you, Matthew. More sunshine around today, just a light to moderate easterly breeze and top temperatures all the way up to 23 or even 24 degrees Celsius, 75 in Fahrenheit. Somewhere towards western areas of the capital, we may even see a 25 degrees Celsius. As we head into this evening, a little bit of cirrus cloud around, but plenty more sunshine. And then overnight tonight, we'll see temperatures in many of the towns drop no lower than around 10 or 11 degrees Celsius. A little bit more in the way of cloud. That cloud will quickly clear into tomorrow morning. There'll be plenty more sunshine around for tomorrow and indeed for the rest of the weekend.
BBC London 94.9. It's 7 minutes past 10.
BBC London 94.9.
Vanessa Feltz.
Call 020 722 42000.
Cowardly, pathetic and utterly pointless. That's Mayor Boris Johnson on the torching of the Muswell Hill Islamic Centre, daubed with graffiti reading EDL before it was burned to the ground. Experts say there's been an increase in anti-Muslim attacks in the past week. G2 of The Guardian reads, "Don't panic, I'm Islamic." Andrew Gilligan in The Telegraph says, no, this has been exaggerated. In fact, anti-Muslim attacks have not peaked. They're far fewer now than there were after 7/7 in London. I will be playing you in a minute a clip of my guest Asghar Bukhari from the Muslim Public Affairs Committee. Kicked off the programme this morning, and I think quite a lot of listeners felt that what he said was unexpected. Others agreed with him implicitly. Obviously some people agreed, some people didn't agree, some people were surprised. Certainly sparked a great many phone calls in response. Let me read you just some of the texts and emails that have come in. This is from don't know, anonymous, but it says, how many Muslims have marched in Trafalgar Square stating Islamist extremism not in my name? None. A big fat 0 is what that says. A person who can do the job should get it, no matter what creed, race or colour. Woolwich murderers, they are murderers, full stop. Why couldn't a Muslim have burned the Islamic building down, then sprayed EDL on the side? England is a free country with rules. Don't forget, after accepting everyone to this land, it is England. David says, burning this place down is a nasty and pathetic crime. All I see right now is one set of extreme nutters against another. This is from Andrea. I'm shocked, so shocked at your speaker to represent the Muslim Public Affairs Committee. He's just confirmed the enemy within scenario. He talks about oppression and Islam being opposed to it, yet look at the basic position of women in their society. Democracy? ? So disappointed with the Muslim response to the killing of drummer Rigby. Where are the protests to say the average Muslim does not concur with these so-called extremists? Their response has been pathetic, yet now we are meant to respond to their mosques being damaged. We have to stop pandering to the overly vocal Muslim community, and they have to accept the way we live or choose to leave and go and live in their own countries where the makeup of the country is centred around Islam. And then, of course, we get back to the perennial question of what you do with people who were born in this country. This is their country. They were born here. Often their parents, even their grandparents, maybe great-grandparents were born here. When you say go back to your country, which country are you talking about? Not Lewisham, I suppose. Martin says, I recognise that most Muslims are harmless. Some are integrating. However, as your Muslim callers reflect, there's always a but to justify Muslim brutality. So many Muslims are unhappy in our country. I suggest that such persons be encouraged to emigrate to a Muslim country where all non-Muslims, especially Jews and Christians, are not subject to minor acts of arson but are persecuted out of existence. Keep up a broad range of opinions. This says, don't mention my name. I'm not a Muslim. But from what I gather over the years from contact with Muslims, a Muslim belongs to a community bound by faith and a NATO principle. An attack on one is an attack on all. The sense of belonging to a country, i.e. being a patriot, comes second. This explains some of the dastardly acts and abhorrent comments by some of the extremists among them. As soon as I get... Oh, I've got it. Good. OK, this is my guest at the very beginning of the programme. So I kicked off by asking about anti-Muslim attacks, whether you feel nervous about being a Muslim in this country. This is in the light of the torching of the Islamic Centre in Muswell Hill yesterday.
The reason why people believe it's Islam, and there is an element, and I'll explain it, right, is because Muslim leaders and the government have particularly almost played down why it's really happening. And why it's really happening, and remember, the killers themselves made it very, very clear, right, even though they said, Allahu Akbar, God is great, before doing the act, they actually said, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. This is happening in our countries, i.e. it's the barbaric policies that are kind of oppressing and killing hundreds of thousands of people right around the world that is having this blowback effect, this kind of enraging across the Muslim world. Now, yes, there is an Islamic element, because Islam in the Quran does not say turn the other cheek. Islam says in the Quran that if you see oppression, fight it, stop it. And so there's the Islamic justification, stop oppression. But the root cause is oppression. It's not Islam. And because the government can't say it's their foreign policy that's causing this, and Muslim leaders are too worried about either losing their funding or coming across as, being labelled as Islamist or whatever else kind of, propaganda terms they want to put out there, everyone's pretty quiet about this issue.
So let me ask you, so Asghar, you're saying categorically on the radio that you think that the killing of drummer Lee Rigby was caused by British foreign policy, are you?
Absolutely. There's no doubt about it. That's the root reason of the cause, and the killers themselves have said it. And in fact, they're not the only ones. When you go back to Boston, they say the same thing. They don't say British foreign policy, but they talk about American foreign policy.
So does that mean... wait a second. Does that mean that you see British as oppressors? You think that we are oppressors, do you?
Britain is talking about the people. If you're talking about the government policy and is it oppressive, there's no doubt, statistically, scientifically, cut it how you will, there's no doubt that it is destroying the lives of millions of people. 500,000 children were killed in Iraq by sanctions alone, and Britain was part of that policy.
You see,
if we talk about...
Sorry to interrupt you again, but we do have to go to the travel in a minute, so I have to ask you pretty speedily. So some people will think, if you think of the British of us, because we are British, and probably you're British yourself, of British people and the British government as oppressors, and therefore you think that this is an oppressive country under an oppressive regime, people will be thinking, why then would you continue to live here? Why would you live here among people that you don't respect, being governed by a government that you consider to be kind of violent oppressors? Why would anyone do that? Even if you were born here, if you fundamentally disagree with the regime, just like people who lived in South Africa, white South Africans who thought apartheid was disgusting, they upped and left, and most of them were only allowed to take about threepence with them. They weren't allowed to take their money or their worldly goods with them, but they didn't approve on ideological grounds of the way the government was conducting itself, and they left. Lots of them came here. If you really don't like it, why don't you leave? I think people will be wondering, rather than stay here, live here, and talk about this government as an oppressive force, and then, like the killers in Woolwich, attempt to wreak havoc, destruction and utter misery from within. I mean, it's such a mind-boggling thing to do, isn't it?
Fine. Okay, that can be answered very quickly in 2 points. One, Martin Luther King felt that the government in America was oppressive to black people. Why didn't he just leave and go back to Africa? Or should he change that government to be better and more humane? The second point to answer that point, Seamus Milne in The Guardian echoes everything that I've said, that it's foreign policy, and wrote about it. Where is he supposed to go? Pakistan? He's a white English person. So it's always easy to go. If you don't like evil being spread around the world, just go away. Go hide in a cave. Or maybe good men stand up in a society and say, this is a wrong, we need to change it and make it better.
But I would say that people will be gasping at the enormity of your mentioning Martin Luther King, who was entirely about peace and peaceful protest, in the same breath as the suspected killers, as I have to call them, in Woolwich, because their methods, their ideology, every single thing distinguishes them as entirely different from one another, doesn't it?
Their reason is oppression. So if you say Martin Luther King, look across Malcolm X, look at Nelson Mandela, who took up violence. What they did is wrong, but their reason is still oppression. And there's the problem. Some people within Britain, because as I've mentioned, many people in Britain echo what I'm saying, that it is foreign policy. Some people in Britain want to bury their heads and say, well, if you say that we're murdering people abroad and propping up dictators and sending drones to kill innocent people abroad, then get out of our country. You're just evil. Wrong. The policy is evil, and it is creating an evil backlash, and that's what we have to address. And
that's Asghar Bukhari there talking to me earlier. He is from the Muslim Public Affairs Committee. Let's talk to Stephen in Middlesex. Hello, Stephen. Good morning.
Yeah, good morning.
What's your response to that, Stephen?
Well, first of all, can I tell you my background so you understand where I'm coming from? My family is from the border of Pakistan and India, so I know a lot about Islam, and I know a lot of some of my family is Muslim.
Yes.
Now, the problem is, it's the Islamic faith itself. That is the problem. It is very violent. The Prophet Muhammad was very violent, and what most Westerners don't understand, what Westerners do, they look at most Muslims. Now, most Muslims aren't violent. They're quite peaceful people. They go around doing their jobs. They want to make a nice life for themselves here. But those Muslims who follow the teachings of Muhammad are the ones who are doing these things. And that Imam that came on earlier is simply lying through his teeth. And he knows that he can lie to white folk in the West and get away with it.
I don't think he's an Imam, but when you say he's lying, what do you mean? I mean, he seemed to mean every single word he said. Why do you think he's lying?
Well, he's lying because he's from the Islamic mosque, or where is he from?
He's from the Muslim Public Affairs Committee.
Right. He obviously knows the Quran. And he said that what these guys done to Lee Rigby was because they were angry because British foreign policy, and the Quran says this. If you read the Quran, chapter 9 of the Quran and chapter 5, verse 33, all Westerners need to read chapter 5, verse 33.
What does it say? Tell me what it says.
It says, those who do mischief in the Muslim lands, they should be murdered, their hands and feet should be cut off from opposite sides, and they should be crucified. Now, the highest form of mischief in Muslim lands is sending a foreign army into Muslim lands to interfere with Muslim affairs. That is the highest form of mischief.
So how do you explain then, Stephen, the number of imams that I've spoken to personally on this programme and Muslims who are people of faith and decency who say that Islam is a peaceful religion, who say that actually you're not even meant to cut down a tree, as one imam told me, in battle, let alone meant to go and start chopping people up with an axe or meat cleaver. You're not supposed to do anything of the kind, they say.
Here's the answer to that. It's very simple. Muslims around the world, first of all, if he's an imam, I would say, from my own personal experience, and I've studied Islam, some of my family is Muslim, and I know Islam very well. He's lying through his teeth, because Islam actually teaches when you're in the land of infidels, you can lie until you get the upper hand. So when an imam comes on and says Islam is peaceful, I know he's lying, because he's an imam and he knows his Quran. When an average Muslim comes on and says Islam is peaceful, he may be ignorant of what Islam says, and he may be sincere. But if you're an imam, you know exactly what the Quran says. And forget even an imam. Why can't Westerners do something very simple? Open the Quran and read it. Why can't they do that?
Well, I suppose you know, but you could say the same thing with the Bible, with the New Testament and the Old Testament. You could say open Leviticus and read it. It's all about stoning adulterers. Look, what a terrible, violent religion. And then the truth is, nobody does that anymore, and things change. People don't necessarily adhere to the letter of the law of the religion. You know, and people mithering about in the middle of the Quran who don't know anything about it. They could come to all sorts of conclusions, couldn't they?
They can. No, but here's the thing. Very simple. The Bible is historical, it's poetic, it's prophetic, and it's instruction how to live. I challenge anyone in the Old Testament and the New to say, go and kill other people from other countries where God says, who don't know me, preach my name, and if they don't convert, kill them. And here's the thing as well. Islam is Muhammad. Islam doesn't follow any other prophet. Although they claim they follow other prophets, they don't. It's all about Muhammad. Muhammad's final marching orders were, chapter 9 of the Quran, fight the Jews and Christians, chapter 9, verse 29 and 30. And what is the reason he gives to fight? Read verse 30. The Jews say Uzair is the son of God. The Christians say Messiah is the son of God. May Allah fight them. So this is the problem. No Jew in Israel is going and killing anybody because of their beliefs. No Christian today, because we follow Jesus, who's the ultimate peaceful man who's ever lived, are fighting people because they say glory to Jesus Christ. I mean, just show me one incident where Christians are beheading somebody and saying glory to Jesus Christ. You don't see it. Every terrorist attack...
My love, Stephen, I wouldn't interrupt you except for a very good reason. I've wanted to speak to Colonel Bob Stewart all morning, and I'm so glad that my team, led by Kate and Mark and Gurpreet, they've got hold of him. That's great. Thank you very much indeed. Colonel Bob, good morning to you. Is he there? I hope he is. Colonel Bob Stewart. Let's bring him up on the microphone if we can. No, he's not? Oh, my goodness sake. I think we got hold of him. I've just cut Stephen off in his prime to speak to Colonel Bob, who's just disappeared. We'll have to get him back again. I don't know whether to go to another call or not. Shall I? Yes. Let me go to Safina in Rice while we try and get Colonel Bob Stewart back on. Safina, good morning to you.
Good morning. Good morning, Vanessa.
Good morning. So where are you on all of this?
Oh, dear. I've just been listening to Stephen, and I don't know who to talk about, Asghar or Stephen. First of all, can I just say about Asghar Bukhari, I've had the pleasure of meeting him a few times. I know what MPAC do, and can I just say, MPAC is all about empowering politically and trying to get Muslims to engage in the voting system. And I think you obviously must know that Muslims sometimes have been accused of not voting, not taking part, and that's in essence what MPAC do, Muslim Public Affairs Committee. And they've been out on marches, I've seen them there, they've done talks, and it's all about empowerment. So I don't think Asghar can be in any way agreeing with what those two men did in Woolwich. I think I do agree with him. It is true. Our foreign policy isn't great. And I think, unfortunately, in this instance, it was used as a reason for the murder of this soldier. It's not. I don't agree with the murder. That's awful. I don't think anybody can accept that. Living here in Britain, we have all our democratic laws, we have ways of doing things, you know, we have processes, we have MPs who we can approach to and kind of lobby and see if, you know, they can take things further. Obviously, these two men didn't feel they could, or, I don't know, for some reason, you know, they thought this would be the best act. The other thing with Stephen, he was talking a load of codswallop. Honestly, I'm Muslim, and I have read the Quran, not in great detail. I think the problem is a lot of Muslims learn it in Arabic. We don't obviously speak Arabic as our first language at all. So we're not completely au fait with.
But when you say he was talking codswallop, I mean he literally was, to coin the actual phrase, quoting chapter and verse. He really was. Chapter so and so, verse 9. Chapter such and such verse. Are you suggesting he was making it up and not telling the truth, or are you suggesting
I think with the Quran, and everyone always says this, Arabic is quite a complicated language, and words can be changed to mean different things in different contexts. And that's why I remember, my daughter's learning Arabic at the moment, and the school puts great emphasis on pronunciation, because they keep saying, if you don't pronounce words correctly, if you don't read them correctly and they're not put in the right context, they will mean different things. And unfortunately, unless you are an Arabic scholar, and Arabic is, your language that you've studied for God knows how many years, I don't think he can say that.
I'm not sure that's 100% true. There are lots of very reliable translations of all key texts in the world, and you can pretty much get a good idea of what something means without having to be an Arabic scholar of great renown. I thank you for the call, my love. I'm going to move on because I've got Colonel Bob Stewart back on the line, and I'm glad of that. Hello, Colonel Bob. Good morning to you.
Hello, Vanessa.
Hello. So we have had, in the wake of the Woolwich killing, we've had Mayor Boris Johnson saying, and I quote, one obvious point, it is completely wrong to blame this killing on Islam, but also wrong to draw a link between this murder and British foreign policy. The fault lies with the warped mindset of those who did it, and for the sake of the victim and his family, the killers need to be brought to justice. However, this morning on this programme, I spoke to Asghar Bukhari of the Muslim Public Affairs Committee, and he said it is absolutely to do with British foreign policy. He says that the killers in Woolwich saw and see Britain as oppressors, and that it is endemic to Islam, and it's imperative, if you are a Muslim, to rise up against your oppressors. So I wanted you, if you wouldn't mind, Colonel Bob, to just explain, as far as you're concerned, how we came to be in the countries that we're in and what we're supposed to be doing there. Because I've had callers saying, we Brits, we've killed millions of people, and I need someone to tell me what really has been happening and what's been the purpose of it or the justification for it.
It goes back to 2001, Vanessa. In 2001, you will recall the Twin Towers appalling tragedy, which was orchestrated, planned and operated by Al-Qaeda under bin Laden. This killed a heck of a lot of people, including several hundred British people who were in the Twin Towers. The place that had actually launched this attack was fundamentally Afghanistan. This is where Al-Qaeda had its base. So it was unsurprising that the then US president said, we've got to actually eliminate these people who are actually causing such a huge threat to our societies. As a result, in 2001, in the end of 2001, a coalition helped the Northern Alliance, these were Afghan people, remove the Taliban regime, which was supporting Al-Qaeda.
Right.
That happened quite quickly, and we didn't really have ground troops there. We actually used it by air power and special forces. Now, special forces were very much involved. What happened then was we walked away and left the place to its own devices, and it went wrong. By 2003, there were calls to go back because it had gone wrong there.
What had happened?
Well, fundamentally, the regime had gone wrong, and the people rising up against it, and it was looked like the Taliban might be coming back. And that was fundamentally why people called for going back in 2003. Now, at the time...
Sorry, may I just ask a question? In your opinion, had the Taliban conquered and had they risen to power, what would have happened to the people in that country?
I don't know. But I do know this, that I wasn't very happy about us going back in 2003. I wasn't a politician then. I was just an ex-army officer.
Yes. Why were you not happy?
Because I thought it was, we'd done our bit, and it was not actually our business to go back in. And I remember saying that. There was another reason too. I felt it was one step too far, because at the time we still had Iraq ongoing, and that was not great either. But let's not go into Iraq. Let's stay with Afghanistan, because that's the theme. So I wasn't very happy then, and I'm still not very happy. because actually I fully support the Prime Minister's desire to get out as soon as possible by the end of 2014. Mm-hmm. And that's why we were there. It has not been a good thing. All the operations we've carried out in the last 10 years, particularly Iraq and Afghanistan, we've gone in there for the best of intentions.
Yes.
And we have helped. I think it's rubbish to talk about going to Iraq for oil and all that sort of stuff. My view was that we went in there for good intentions to start with, and things went wrong. And the lesson of it, to me, now as a politician, Vanessa,
yes,
is that we went in there with good intentions. We did our best. It cost us in lives mostly. And it cost us in money as well, but mainly lives, because you can't bring back a life, as we all know. And actually, the lesson of that goes forward now, which makes me extremely worried about us getting involved in any shape or form in Syria. So, because actually I don't trust anything. The lesson for me is we go in there with good intentions, things go wrong, maybe we're part of things going wrong, except that may be the case. But actually, in the end, we get a kicking, and we've actually lost lives, wasted a lot of taxpayers' money, but fundamentally lost lives, because lives, I repeat, are the most important thing.
Have we gone in as murderous oppressors? And even if we didn't intend to, have we ended up behaving as murderous oppressors?
No.
Is it true that we have killed millions of people?
We went in there to help the people, actually, in both cases. We did go in there to help the people, and we are not murderous oppressors. None of the boys that were under my command, or soldiers in the British Army, are murderous oppressors. And these people that use this excuse that, Woolwich happened because of British foreign policy, it's just an excuse for them to actually do this sort of thing. Their problem is that they have got a very warped sense of the Muslim religion, Islam to me, and I spoke Arabic. I lived among the Arabs. My dad was a soldier in Jordan and in Aden, and my father bought a boy aged 7 and put him in our room because he found him in the desert, and he lived with us for 2 years. Mm-hmm. So, I do have a slight understanding of Middle Eastern affairs. Slight. Not great, but slight. Mm-hmm. And I do actually think that when we go there, it is almost 100% we're going there for good reasons. And I'm sorry, Afghanistan and Iraq wasn't about oil. There were other ways of doing that. So we are getting unfairly blamed. And actually, in any way, to suggest that this innocent boy who was killed in Woolwich should have been killed for reasons of British foreign policy is just a damned excuse, and I resent it and utterly reject it.
Thank you very much indeed for talking to us this morning. Colonel Bob Stewart there, currently the Tory MP for Beckenham, but as you know, the former UN commander. We are taking calls. If you want to respond to Colonel Bob Stewart, please do so. If you want to respond to the earlier conversation with Asghar Bukhari, please do so. If you live in Muswell Hill and you're bereft of your local Islamic community centre, please call. If you feel nervous because you are Muslim and you feel there's a spike of anti-Muslim feeling, then call. Whatever you're doing in London, however you feel, do make sure you get your point across this morning. 0207 224 2000, and we will be back straight after the news headlines.
Good morning. The Met Police Commissioner must set out how he intends to tackle a growing trend of anti-Islamic attacks, according to the Muslim Council of Britain. Since soldier Lee Rigby was killed in Woolwich a fortnight ago, mosques have been targeted, far-right groups have been protesting, and yesterday a Somali community centre in Muswell Hill was destroyed in a suspected arson attack. A former prison officer from East London has become the 66th person to be arrested by detectives investigating allegations that journalists paid public officials for information. The 39-year-old was picked up at his home in Waltham Forest this morning. Meanwhile, the former News of the World editor and number 10 head of communications, Andy Coulson, has pleaded not guilty to 3 charges relating to phone hacking and paying officials for information. Yesterday, Rebecca Brooks and almost a dozen other former colleagues also denied similar charges. Conservatives in Barnet have voted to expel the borough's former mayor, Brian Coleman, from their association following his conviction for common assault. Last month, the 51-year-old pleaded guilty to attacking a cafe owner who'd filmed him parking illegally in Finchley High Road. Transport for London has set a new target to reduce deaths and serious injuries on the roads by a further 40% by 2020. It's launching a 7-year plan, including the extension of trial schemes like the 20-mile-an-hour speed limit at the Waterloo roundabout. London's weather, dry and sunny and a bit warmer than yesterday, with top temperatures of 24 Celsius, 75 Fahrenheit.
And with the travel news here on BBC London 94.9, I'm Paul Murphy. The anti-clockwise M25, we've still got lane 1 closed near junction 15, that's the M4, and that's following yesterday's incident. We've still got the authorities picking up the cherry picker and dismantling it before the road can be properly reopened, but queues may remain back to junction 20 for Kings Langley, taking an hour and a half or so to get through. Clockwise, one lane is shut for recovery of a vehicle that's overturned 18 to 19, Chorleywood to Watford, queues back to 17 for Maple Cross. On the North Circular in New Southgate, still queuing westbound after that collision between Bounds Green and Coney Hatch, queues now back to 4 Street. On the A40 coming into town through Perivale, still queuing eastbound approaching the Medway underpass. That's after that collision earlier on at the start of the underpass. Queues remain back towards the Swakeleys roundabout in Uxbridge. There's still long delays coming into town. In the city, Old Bailey is shut northbound between Ludgate Hill and Newgate Street, and that's because of demonstrations going on outside the Old Bailey today. In fact, Old Bailey is going to be shut until 7 o'clock tomorrow evening. Also, Kings Road in Chelsea, that's queuing approaching Markham Street. That's after an earlier collision. Hammersmith and City Line still running with severe delays after that signal failure at Barbican, and the Circle Line still running with minor delays as well. If you can update us, give us a call 0207 224 2000, or you can tweet at BBC Travel Alert. Paul Murphy, BBC London 94.9. Your next update's just before 11.
BBC London 94.9.
Vanessa Feltz.
Call 020 722 42000.
And some of your texts and emails. This is from David. Studies have been made of the rise of fascism in Germany in the 1930s, partly, I suppose, to try and avoid such a scenario again. Is doing such a thing excusing Hitler? Of course not. It's looking for reasons, expressed or ridiculous or otherwise. Do we just say Hitler was mad so nothing can be done? Shai says, this morning's show seems to be becoming more and more depressing. I'm sorry about that. But, you know, we're doing a show on the destruction, the torching of an Islamic centre. It's not going to be cheerful, is it? It's going to be real, though, and it's going to be a reflection of what's going on in London. And I'm afraid we can't be all bouncy and happy-clappy every day, Shai. I'm sorry about that. He says, what seems to be so evident, not just from your callers, but also the way the entire debate is going, is that the sense of complete and utter mistrust is growing like an uncontrollable cancer amongst all communities. If the them and us attitude and belief continues, it will damage all of us and our future generations will suffer. That lady that says she looks at all Muslims differently because she doesn't know if they hate her, well, that could be reversed, and the same said by the Muslim community. Should they link all white people with the EDL and assume that all white people are racist and share EDL ideologies? Can we blame all white people for the actions of Hitler, of the Norway psycho, of IRA terrorists? Now is the time to open our hearts, know our fellow neighbours and build that trust and friendship. That is the next step. We do need to know what motivates morons like this, not as a means to justify, but to prevent any future action. Surely this has to be done. You say you cannot justify something so heinous, then what is your answer? Merely growing hate between all communities. This needs to be stopped and a solution found. You talk about a democracy, absolutely, and I think the issue is that there is a complete lack of knowledge perhaps of how to air their voices in a democratic way. Is it lack of education? Is it the fact they don't know how to express their opinions at the right platforms? I don't know, but we do need to address this disenfranchised group. Also, side note, inviting the usual suspects on radio and TV to speak for Muslims just to provoke a response makes good TV and radio, but does not help the situation. There is an abundance of more logical, intelligent voices that are available to the BBC. That, I think, is unfair. Asghar Bukhari is the spokesperson for the Muslim Public Affairs Committee. That is the most kind of bona fide organisation that you would consider going to. I mean, he's not a kind of known radical. He's not somebody that you would choose to talk to in order to provoke a reaction at all. And in fact, what he said, I was not expecting it. I didn't think it was going to be quite the way it was. It was not intentional. We certainly didn't book Anjem Chowdhury or somebody with the intention of causing a furore. That is not what happened on the programme today. Far from it. If you don't go to the Muslim Public Affairs Committee, where are you going to go to get a response to something like an Islamic centre being burned down? Let's go to Mike in Penge. Hello, Mike.
Hello, Vanessa.
Morning. You're responding to what Colonel Bob Stewart had to say.
Well, that and a couple of previous callers as well, actually. I did have a couple of concerns as well. The first one I would address to the gentleman who was your guest from the Muslim Public Affairs Council.
Yes, Asghar Bukhari is his name, yes.
Yeah, he's misrepresenting the Quran. He's saying it says something that it doesn't say.
Tell me what you think it says. I mean, really, it seems as if we can take as many calls from as many people and each person will say something else about what it says.
I'm not a Muslim, but Muslims believe that the Quran is the exact word of God and it doesn't change.
Mm-hmm.
And it hasn't changed for 1,700 years. So this is not debatable. It doesn't say an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. It says the exact opposite. It says, it does say that in the Torah.
Mm-hmm.
It does say that in Mosaic law, but the Quran says the exact opposite.
Yes, but in the Torah, it doesn't mean that. It means the financial recompense that would be equivalent for an eye or a tooth. I've learned that myself, and so do rabbis who deliver shiurim on exactly that. It does not mean you go and gouge the other fellow's eye out. It doesn't mean that.
That may be so, but it does say in the Quran specifically, don't do this. Do the exact opposite of this. Do not go and take an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth.
But what about all the different examples of different verses from the Quran that were quoted by our caller earlier?
He didn't know what he was talking about.
Well, how can you quote it without knowing what you're talking about? Either he's reading from a translation of the Quran or he's not. He wasn't making it up, was he?
I think he was. And
you think he was literally making it up? He was quoting chapter and verse. He was saying, turn to chapter 9, verse 9.
He said that his family were from the border regions of Pakistan. That may be true, but I have reason to doubt it.
Why? Why would you phone up and say that for no reason if it were not true? What's the point?
Because he might be a member of the EDL who's trying to get on the air.
God,
I'm not sure.
I mean, he might be, but I don't. That's not what I picked up from that caller. Certainly not. But if you did, I mean, obviously you're entitled to think whatever you think, but that was not what it seemed to me at any rate. I thought he seemed like a bona fide caller, actually.
Well, I think you can sort of judge it on its merits.
Right.
I would say this. Michael Adebolajo is a Catholic. He's a Roman Catholic.
Not anymore, he's not. He's converted to Islam.
Because he doesn't know what it says in the Quran.
Well, he thinks he knows. He's been preaching and he's been worshipping for years.
Where?
What does it matter? We heard from my caller, Abdullah, at a sort of spin-off mosque adjacent to another one. We heard all about where he's been worshipping and also where he's been lecturing. And also, what does it matter if you don't think he's a Muslim? If he thinks he is, who cares whether you think he's a Catholic? What relevance is that to anything?
I've got a beard, but that doesn't make me a rabbi. I can stand up in court and wave a Quran in the air and say I'm a Muslim, but that doesn't mean I'm a Muslim. That just means I'm holding a Quran in my hand.
But what difference does that make? If he thinks he is and he's a passionate believer and fanatical and absolutely convinced that he's a Muslim and you say he's not, so what?
Well, why do you imagine that he is?
I imagine that he is because he says he is, and he says he believes in it, and he appears to believe in it, and he appears to live by it.
He's not even vaguely credible.
What do you mean he's not credible? He's spent the last however many years since he was converted preaching, discoursing.
It's not a popular thing to convert to Islam in 2003.
Yes, but people do, though.
Yes, they do, but not when there's a global war on terror on, unless they're infiltrators and spies.
No, I don't think that's the case at all, and I think you'll find it isn't. I bet if I ask, I'm going to ask it now, Mike, and thanks for the call. Mike says it's not credible to convert to Islam. Nobody would really do it. I wonder, maybe you are a convert to Islam. If you are, you may want to ring up and say, well, I did it. 0207 224 2000. Let's go to Riyadh in Richmond. Hi, Riyadh, good morning.
Oh, good morning, Vanessa. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. And things do seem to be rather explosive on this programme this morning, and I don't use that word literally, but you know what I mean. Lots of people getting very cross. I thought it was actually going to be. I thought we'd get lots of calls from people saying either yes, I have noticed a sort of spike of anti-Muslim feeling, or no, I haven't. And I also thought we'd get calls from people saying how upsetting about the Islamic Centre in Muswell Hill. I didn't really imagine the show was going to turn out this way. However, here we are, and that's one of the sort of delights and also the horrors of this programme. You never know what anyone's going to say. Where do you stand on the whole thing?
Well, being a British-born Muslim, I just want to say that, what happened is abhorrent. I totally disagree with that. And for me, my interpretation of Islam does not cite those kind of actions in terms of retaliation. But what I do want to say, because I'm British-born, Vanessa, this is my home.
Yes.
But, the comments by some of your earliest listeners were like, if you're not happy in the UK, go elsewhere. Where would I go, Vanessa? Where would I go? I would like an explanation to that. Where would I go? Just because I disagree with certain aspects of this country.
Yes.
This country, for me, is great. I even said this to my parents the other day, at the weekend. Yes, despite lots of problems in the UK, the UK is one of the best countries in the world. I think, in terms of the benefits that we have as citizens, the democratic rights, access to free healthcare. There's lots of benefits in this country. But when people say, I mean, Vanessa, I'm not white, I'm Asian, but where would I go? No, that really, forgive my language, annoys me.
Well, I did cite the example of the white South Africans who disagreed with apartheid and felt they could no longer stay in the country under that regime. They were born there. They were Afrikaners. You could say, where would they go? Where could they go? They were born there, and the answer is they went somewhere else. They sent themselves into exile. They left because they fundamentally disagreed with the ideology. So when you look at that example alone, it isn't true that just because you were born somewhere you can't leave if you don't like it. If you don't like it, you can leave. In fact, if you don't like it, you don't approve of it, you think you're living under an oppressive regime, you should leave, shouldn't you?
Well, no, I disagree with that, Vanessa, because like one of your earlier callers said, in America, when the racial problems, did all the Black African Americans leave? Is everyone happy about slavery in the Deep South? Did they all pack their bags and leave and emigrate back to Africa? No, they didn't. They stayed. And also,
but there is a difference there in various ways. One is that obviously, as I've already said, Martin Luther King was all about peaceful protest, and the other thing is that what Black Americans were seeking to do was simply, and it was huge at the time. I realise the word simple doesn't mean simple. It was very unbelievably difficult and fraught with terrible suffering. But what they were trying to do was achieve equality, absolute equality, and integrate utterly and seamlessly into the society that existed. They were not the thing that they were objecting to was the racial oppression and the victimization, but not the rest of the regime, if you know what I mean. They wanted to be part of it. They didn't want to overthrow it. They didn't want to destroy it, and they didn't want materially to influence it and change it. They wanted the right to be an equal part of everything that was going on and share just like everyone else in the American dream. Now that's not the same, is it? If you look at the suspected killers in Woolwich, that's not what they want.
No, Vanessa, you're totally right. And you yourself said earlier in the show, because I heard you from 9 o'clock today, you said that the Muslim community were very quick, very prompt and very vocal in their condemnation of the killings in Woolwich. You said that yourself, and I totally support that. I am one of the people who say that my belief that it's not the teaching of Islam, that is not in the Quran, that you go around killing people to promote Islam. I disagree with that completely. But, Vanessa, I think, like your first caller said, the problem is that the media play down foreign policy hugely, and the fact that foreign policy is actually the instigator of certain people's reactions in terms of the killings in Woolwich. It is foreign policy. It is played down, and the thing is, people don't wish to talk about it. People don't wish to address it. I'll give you an example, Vanessa. I listen to you regularly, and you may have spoken about this, but I'm not aware that you have.
Yeah.
Are you aware of the Chagos Islands in the Indian Ocean?
No, tell me about that.
No, okay. The Chagos Islands are a British colony in the Indian Ocean. The British government exiled an entire population to Mauritius, to the UK, so the US.
Oh, I do remember. Somebody, you're reminding. Somebody has once phoned and talked about this before. Yeah, so I ought to have replied yes, but you've now reminded us, and Ola's nodding his head as well, because we do remember a caller telling us about this before. Yes, carry on, please.
Yeah, so basically, this is a legacy of foreign policy. Foreign policy is going around. It has had a tendency to go around, wage wars in other countries, kill people who are native to those countries, play it down, and we could also argue it portrays that one life is more superior than the other, which I totally disagree with. Or humanity is humanity. The human race is the human race. We're all equal on the same footing. Yet foreign policy, I'll give you an example like the Chagos Islands. An entire population under British rule, under British colony, by the Foreign Office was exiled from the Chagos Islands. Their democratic rights ignored. The UN Charter ignored. It was played down in Parliament. It wasn't even discussed in the House at the time by the government. So the US could actually build a military base on the Chagos Islands, and we got a discount on Polaris missiles.
And so let me ask you, what is your approved method of bringing that to people's attention, of making sure that such a terrible thing never happens again? I mean, you're in Richmond, for God's sake. In England's green and pleasant land. It's lovely. Everyone wants to be in Richmond. It's gorgeous. You're in Richmond. What are you going to do to bring about change if that's what you want to do?
Well, basically, Vanessa, I mean, for me, it's all about, being vocal, raising your opinion, but not indulging in killings, not going around burning down buildings. I mean, that promotes hatred.
Do you think
more retaliation?
Do you think, as some of my listeners have suggested, not all, but some this morning, that the Muslim community, assuming that there is such a thing as a unified Muslim community, and I know when you say the black community, people dislike it because they say, for God's sake, just because I'm black doesn't mean I think the same as that other guy over there. If you say the Jewish community, you can't really say it because there's some Jews who recognise the chief rabbi, some who don't recognise each other as Jewish. You know what I mean? It's an easy catchphrase. It doesn't necessarily mean anything. But some of my listeners have said, why has not the Muslim community, if it exists, been more vocal, more prominent, more quick to maybe stage a demonstration and say we disagree with what happened, we deplore it, most Muslims are, disgusted, something like that, just to make it very, very public. Do you think that could have happened or should have happened?
To be honest, Vanessa, I think the fact that our imams, senior imams from the council, the Muslim Council in Britain, actually were prompt, very rapid, and very vocal in saying they condemned the killings. They are not in favour of this type of killing. They're not in favour of this type of retaliation. I think, I'm not saying that's sufficient. I think yes, people could have demonstrated, but the principle it was that people responded promptly. People were very vocal in saying that this is not their interpretation of Islam. This is not their view of Islam, and this is because Islam is based on interpretation of the Quran. The Quran was written centuries ago. This is why we have many variances in Islam practice, because it's all down to interpretation, how one reads the Quran, how one interprets the Quran.
I'm going to move on simply because we've got so many calls, but I thank you for yours enormously. Thanks for calling. Straight after this, we'll be talking to Dennis, who's on the line in Hampstead.
BBC London 94.9.
Freedom of speech on our agenda. Please feel free to contribute.
This is Eddie Nestor's Drive Time.
The question is whether these people are banned from the airwaves.
Just our conversation should have highlighted all the difficulties of censorship.
Weekdays from 5.
You can't ban me because you don't like what I'm saying, Abdul.
No, absolutely, and that's my point.
Eddie Nestor's Drive Time.
Do you get a sense that you can say what you actually think?
No, absolutely not.
People should be allowed to speak, but where would your line be then?
Weekdays from 5.
It is going too far, yes.
So that's your line. I've already crossed your line.
BBC London 94.9.
Let's go to Dennis on the line in Hampstead. Hi, Dennis. Morning.
Yeah, good morning, Vanessa. Listening to the programme, number one, the first thing that I think is terrible is listening to where a place of worship has been torched, which is shocking. Listening to people being attacked because they're all thrown into the middle of what's going on because of their colour. But, however, I can understand people saying how terrible it is for Muslims who are being killed, blaming our country for what's going on outside, blaming America. But at the moment in Syria, it's something like between 70,000 and 100,000 Muslim people have been killed, and some by poison gas, women and children being tortured. This went on in Iraq, the same thing, and I don't hear one word of protest from any of these people who are so concerned about Muslims being killed when there's nearly 100,000 being killed now in Syria, and it's still going on.
Do you think that is because we're not talking about Syria? Do you think if I had kicked off the programme this morning by asking about that, we would have been deluged by calls on that subject, or do you think there's another agenda? Do you think there's another reason why, Dennis?
Well, the reason being is they want to just put the blame on our country, on America, and everything else. I mean, and then we hear this horrible character, Chowdhury, speaking about this poor young soldier that got killed, hoping he will burn in hell.
Let's not repeat it. It's just so distressing. Let's not repeat that kind of thing.
Well, this is what we're listening to. But they don't say one word about the 100,000 at the moment.
But what is your point, Dennis? Why you obviously have a theory as to why they don't, or why people have not. What is your reason? What do you think is the reason that they don't?
As far as they're concerned, it's okay for them to do it, but not for somebody else.
So when you say them to do it, who do you mean? They
do not want to blame their own people doing what they're doing against the population where they're wiping them out. They're not concerned with that at all. That seems to be okay. But when it comes to, they just want to completely blame this country, America, people in the West, for whatever reasons they can, because they want to try and imply their own laws into the country where they've come to live.
So what would you like to say about Syria?
What would I like to say? About what? About what's going
on in Syria, yes.
Well, I would like to, the same as any other decent person would say. It is the most terrible thing that's going on there. Where you're getting innocent people wiped out. No one can seem to stop it. And all the people that come onto your program who are against what we do or what America does or anything else, they don't talk about the good things that are being done, but they only want to keep blaming what's going on from here. They take that pure young soldier, chopped into pieces, hold up the two people as heroes. Yeah, that's all okay. But what's going on in other parts being carried out by their own people, that's got nothing at all to do with it.
Dennis, thanks for raising the point. I wondered if anyone was ever going to mention Syria. I certainly didn't ask anyone to, but I thought maybe people independently might start mentioning Syria and what's going on over there. If you want to, please do. If you don't want to, you might want to explain why not. 0207 224 2000. Looks to me as though we're going to carry on this discussion right through the programme until the very end at 12 o'clock. So you do have time to call. If you haven't called yet, make this the day you do speak to a radio station. If you feel that Muslims are being somehow wrongly depicted, then call and say so. If you feel that the British are oppressors and our foreign policy is to blame for what happened in Woolwich, then phone and say so. If you think the discussion has gone on an unexpected tangent, all you really want to do is talk about the Muslim Community Centre in Muswell Hill that's been torched and is now razed to the ground, and you think that's just terrible, because of course it is terrible, you may want to ring and say that too. The number's 0207 224 2000. If you thought you might be ringing up to say how people are responding to you as a Muslim, or whether you have a different view of your friends when you see the sorts of things they've said to you on Facebook about Muslims, which was the very day after the Woolwich killing, we had callers saying, I cannot believe the things my friends are putting on Facebook. I'm having to defriend them. I'm not going to speak to them again. Their anti-Muslim fervour is just disgusting and I am appalled. That happened straight away. That may be your take on the whole thing. But you've got about an hour or so to join me on the radio today. It is a big subject, of course. I don't claim that we're going to come to any kind of solutions, but certainly if there's anything you feel is misunderstood, misinterpreted, you wish you could just make it clear, this is the place to make it clear. And everybody will listen. Lots of MPs will be listening to this. I know that the Mayor of London gets copies of this show. Very often we get our listeners quoted back to us, and people who are in what are supposedly high places do listen to you. So the number's 0207 224 2000. And let's talk now to Kevin in Bloomsbury. Hello, Kevin.
Hi there, good morning, Vanessa.
Good morning.
A fantastic show. We're listening to people giving their unedited viewpoints
this
morning on a very contentious issue. I had reservations about calling at all, really.
Well, I'm glad you have called. It's good. I'm glad you've called.
Well, the point I really wanted to make, Vanessa, is I have the answer of what's caused all this, and it's not British foreign policy. The real cause of all this is the nature of religion itself.
Right.
Religion is very, very divisive, and unfortunately, it seems that Islam is more divisive than most religions. Most religions are quite tolerant of other religions, but it seems to me, or my perception of Islam, I'm no scholar. I'm actually an atheist myself. I like facts and reason, and I'm a free thinker. I don't need a holy person to tell me how to live and behave to be a decent person. So I follow my own way. And it really gets my back up as someone who identifies himself as non-religious and just British when this kind of thing is blamed on British foreign policy.
Yes.
It's not British foreign policy. It's religion itself. It divides people, and it especially divides people, it seems to me, between Muslims and non-Muslims, or, as they would say, infidels. That's basically what I wanted to say. It's a little bit more fundamental than British foreign policy, and I must say that the last guy that was on, he talked a lot of sense, and also the guy that you unfortunately had to leave before Bob Stewart came on. He answered a few questions that I've heard myself, that there are passages in the Quran which the fundamentalists take to justify their actions. Specifically, the beheading of people, which is such a barbaric thing to to people. I know we used to burn people at the stake here, but that was hundreds of years ago. We've left that all behind now. But there is some sort of justification for violence, it seems to me, that is inherent in Islam.
So when I speak to the imams who say they are horrified that Islam is a peaceful religion, that they don't recognise Muhammad or his precepts or his tenets of belief in any violent kind of reprisals or attacks, do you think they're not telling the truth, or do you think they have a different? You think they're not telling the truth?
I do think they're not being completely honest. And like the lady said earlier, it's unfortunate because I'm a child of the universe, Vanessa. I don't align myself to any particular religion. But it seems to me in Islam, it's ironic that when they talk about being oppressed, it seems to me that Islam is very oppressive. It oppresses women, it oppresses gay people, it oppresses freedom of speech. It is an oppressive religion. There's no getting away from it, really. There are elements of it which just don't move with the times. I mean, we can all have a giggle about the Church of England tying itself up in knots about women bishops and gays getting married, but at least they're trying to move with the times. They're trying to move with society, and it just seems to me that Islam won't do that.
I've got to stop you, Kevin, because it really is time for the news. Thank you for the call. Obviously, we're going to carry this on. We've got so many callers. We've got extra people on the phones. If you want to get your word in, then do. You heard what Kevin said. He says Islam is an oppressive religion. Now, you may find that deeply offensive. You may be able to absolutely explain that he is wrong and that is not true. But unless you do it, we'll never hear from you. So 0207 224 2000. It's time now for the news of travel and the weather at 11 o'clock.
And with the travel news, I'm Paul Murphy. The anti-clockwise M25 still down to 3 lanes between junctions 16 and 15. That's the M40 to the M4, and that's following yesterday's incident at junction 15 involving the cherry picker. That is still being dismantled, so lane 1 remains closed, and queues are back to 20 for Kings Langley, taking an hour and a half at least to get through that stretch. It really depends where you are in the queues. Also on the clockwise section, heavy in the works around junction 5. That's the M26. Further clockwise, now clear between 18 and 19. That's Chorleywood to Watford, and that's after a collision earlier on. In the city, Old Bailey is going to be closed northbound until 7 o'clock tomorrow evening between Ludgate Hill and Giltspur Street, and that's because of demonstrations going on outside the Old Bailey. On Watford Road in Kenton, there are temporary lights in around Pedworth Road. Expect some delays. Buckingham Palace Road in near Victoria, one lane is shut southbound. We've got repairs going on to a gas leak around Elizabeth Street. And on the Tube, the Hammersmith and City line, still severe delays after that signal failure at Barbican. The Circle line, minor delays. If you can update us, give us a call, 0207 224 2000, or you can tweet at BBC Travel Alert. Paul Murphy, BBC London 94.9. Your next update just after past.
On 94.9 FM, DAB, satellite and online.
London's news, London stories.
BBC London 94.9.
London's news at 11. I'm Matthew Schofield. Scotland Yard's counter-terrorism squad is continuing to investigate yesterday's fire at a Somali community centre in Muswell Hill. It's being treated as suspicious after the letters EDL were spray-painted on the building, although the English Defence League has denied any involvement. This morning, the Muslim Council of Britain has called on the Met Commissioner to set out exactly how he plans to stop anti-Islamic attacks in the wake of the death of soldier Lee Rigby. The director of the charity Faith Matters, Fayaz Mughal, has told BBC London 94.9 we need a measured response.
The key thing here is to provide community confidence. After Woolwich, we just need to have some sensitivity and also reassurance that actually this country is a safe place. And I think we need to have that message kind of reinforced, and the fact that we as communities need to kind of get on in our lives together.
A former prison officer from East London has become the 66th person to be arrested by detectives investigating allegations that journalists paid public officials for information. The 39-year-old was picked up at his home in Waltham Forest this morning. The former News of the World editor and number 10 head of communications, Andy Coulson, has pleaded not guilty to 3 charges relating to phone hacking and paying officials for information. Yesterday, Rebecca Brooks and almost a dozen other former colleagues also denied the charges. Ed Miliband has promised to cap spending on social security so a future Labour government could turn the economy around and build a stronger country. He's used a speech in Newham in the past hour to promise to allow councils to negotiate lower rents with landlords, to cut housing benefit and release money for house building. And he denied that limiting social security spending would go against Labour values.
Controlling social security spending and putting decent values at the heart of the system are not conflicting priorities. It's only by reforming social security with the right values that we'll be able to control costs. And the system does need reform.
Security is tight outside the Old Bailey, where a 30-year-old man charged with terror offences as part of an investigation into a friend of one of the suspected killers of Lee Rigby is due to appear. Shah Jalal Hussain, who was arrested in East London yesterday, faces 2 charges connected to the alleged dissemination of terrorist publications. Parents and childcare providers have welcomed the decision to drop plans for nursery staff and childminders to look after more children. The government said it would reduce the cost to parents, but Nick Clegg has blocked the idea, saying it could actually have made childcare more expensive. Katie O'Donovan from the website Mumsnet says its users are relieved.
I think people were really worried that if you gave staff too many children to look after, particularly young children, they wouldn't get the care and the attention and the love that they needed. I think parents also felt that they weren't sure that any savings that were made would be passed on to them with their really expensive childcare bills. Parents, childcare workers, nursery workers, childminders all were opposed to the plan, so it's great to see that common sense has prevailed.
The Health Secretary says the NHS is drawing up a vulnerable older people's plan to help alleviate the pressure on A&E departments. Jeremy Hunt says officials have been told they have a year to develop and put into place a plan of action to help what he calls the heaviest users of the NHS. The London-born writer Tom Sharp has died at his home on the Costa Brava at the age of 85. He wrote dark and often outrageously comic novels, including the Wilt series, while Blot on the Landscape and Porterhouse Blue were both made into successful TV series. The government's spending watchdog says Revenue and Customs is losing hundreds of millions of pounds in cigarette duty because it's failing to clamp down on tobacco smuggling. The National Audit Office says HMRC didn't meet any of its targets last year, and its aim of saving £1.4 billion over 4 years now appears unachievable. This customs officer says policing smuggling is tough.
We are standing on external EU border, protecting not our own market but EU market generally. According to our calculations, about more than half of our cigarettes are dedicated for the Western Europe, UK also.
The GMB union claims Lambeth is the most expensive place in the country to die. It says burials there can cost more than £5,300, and London boroughs account for 16 of the 20 most expensive areas in the country. The union says someone's making a lot of money out of people's bereavement. And it's emerged a village school in Essex had to be evacuated yesterday after a pupil took an artillery shell to show and tell. Army bomb disposal experts were called to St Margaret's C of E Primary in Bowers Gifford, but decided the device wasn't dangerous. Now let's get London's weather from Elizabeth Rizzini.
Thank you, Matthew. Lots of sunshine around for the rest of the day. Top temperatures up to 23 or 24 degrees Celsius, fairly widely across central London. We may even see a 25 somewhere, most likely towards western areas. As we head into this evening, there'll be more sunshine around, a bit of high cirrus cloud at times, and then overnight tonight, temperatures not dropping out of double figures. We'll see the breeze increase into tomorrow morning. It will be a bit of a cloudy start for some of us, but the cloud again should thin and disperse. There'll be lots of sunshine around for the rest of the day tomorrow. A breezier weekend, so slightly lower temperatures, but fine and dry for the next few days.
And in the city a short time ago, the FTSE 100 was down just 1 point at 64.18. BBC London 94.9. It's 6 minutes past 11.
BBC London 94.9.
Vanessa Feltz.
Call 020 722 42000.
Today's show inspired, unfortunately, by the torching of the Islamic Centre in Muswell Hill. Boris Johnson called it cowardly, pathetic and utterly pointless. My first guest on the show this morning, Asghar Bukhari from the Muslim Public Affairs Committee. This is just a little bit of what he said.
And remember, the killers themselves made it very, very clear, right? Even though they said, Allahu Akbar, God is great, before doing the act, they actually said, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. This is happening in our countries, i.e., it's the barbaric policies that are kind of oppressing and killing hundreds of thousands of people right around the world that is having this blowback effect, this kind of enraging across the Muslim world. Now, yes, there is an Islamic element, because Islam in the Quran does not say turn the other cheek. Islam says in the Quran that if you see oppression, fight it, stop it. And so there's the Islamic justification, stop oppression. But the root cause is oppression. It's not Islam. And because the government can't say it's their foreign policy that's causing this, and Muslim leaders are too worried about either losing their funding or coming across as, being labelled as Islamist or whatever else kind of, propaganda terms they want to put out there, everyone's pretty quiet about this issue.
So let me ask you, so Asghar, you're saying categorically on the radio that you think that the killing of Dramali Rigby was caused by British foreign policy, are you?
Absolutely. There's no doubt about it. That's the root reason of the cause, and the killers themselves have said it. And in fact, they're not the only ones. When you go back to Boston, they say the same thing. They don't say British foreign policy, but they talk about American foreign policy.
So does that mean? Wait a second. Does that mean that you see British as oppressors? You think that we are oppressors, do you?
Britain is talking about the people. If you're talking about the government policy and is it oppressive, there's no doubt, statistically, scientifically, cut it how you will, there's no doubt that it is destroying the lives of millions of people, 500,000.
We spoke to Colonel Bob Stewart. I wrote down his words exactly. He said these people who use the excuse that British foreign policy is responsible for the Woolwich killings, it's just an excuse. He said they have a warped sense of the Quran. We've been taking your calls on this all morning. And joining us on the programme with a different perspective, and it should be an interesting one, is Daniel Trilling. He's the author of Nasty People, The Rise of the Far Right. Daniel, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Maybe you'd like to respond to what you just heard Asghar Bukhari saying.
Well, I think he, drastically oversimplifies the issue, really. I mean, I think as you then quoted another guest as having said foreign policy, or that the killers were, using an excuse for what they did. I mean, they clearly made a link in their statements that were recorded to foreign policy, but I don't think you can just see it as a case of cause and effect, really.
Tell me about the rise of the far right. I mean, your book, Nasty People, we obviously the adjective nasty used to apply to the Tory party. Theresa May and David Cameron obviously famously united in trying to get rid of that nasty appendage to the party. Why have you decided to call the book Nasty People?
Well, it's a reference to a headline from The Sun, in fact. The full headline makes a pun on the initials BNP. Which is obviously the name of the far-right party led by Nick Griffin. And really I used it, there was a bit of a twist to it in that what I tried to do in the book was show that while far-right groups clearly are profoundly racist and are trying to whip up hatred and division within our society, they're given the materials with which to do so by tabloid newspapers, other sections of the media that do portray immigrants negatively, put out a lot of Islamophobic content, make it look as if there's something inherently wrong with Islam that leads people to commit acts of terrorism, or that the growth of the number of mosques in this country is somehow a threat to what they call British values and the rest of it. And that far-right groups, this is their raw material from which they construct their own propaganda and from which they try and build up support.
But nobody can say that the media is responsible for what happened in Woolwich, can they?
No, and I mean, I wasn't saying that, and it wasn't a far-right group that carried out the killing in Woolwich. What I'm saying is that...
No, I know it. I know that, but the response to the killing in Woolwich is a response to something that happened, not a response to something manufactured by the tabloid press.
Well, absolutely, but I think the question of why there was such a profound and prolonged backlash against Muslims tells you that it's more than just a single act of murder that has caused that. And I think, there are various opinion polls. There was an opinion poll taken the weekend after the Woolwich killing that showed that anti-Islam attitudes had gone up a small amount since the Woolwich killing, but that there was a significant number of people who even before then believed that Islam was somehow inherently in conflict with British democracy. I think it was about 30% of people polled in November last year.
Well, if you listen to Asghar Bukhari of the Muslim Public Affairs Committee, Jamie, he did call the British oppressors. He did say it was an oppressive regime. So that would denote, and it would seem to bear out the idea that Islam would be in conflict, as you say, with democracy, wouldn't it?
Well, I think there are two issues here. First of all, I don't think what your assertion is true at all. I don't think that was actually a reflection of what he was saying. I mean, he was specifically disagreeing with British government policies, and it's not just Muslims who opposed wars in Iraq and Afghanistan at all. And I don't think if I say to you that I disagree with the government's policy on the Afghan war, you wouldn't accuse me of being undemocratic because I disagree with it. However, I think something is getting conflated there, and you can see this in the mentality of the extremist groups that surrounded the people accused of the Woolwich killing, which is this. The way I see it is, while one can clearly disagree with the policies of the war on terror, or the war in Afghanistan, the war in Iraq, that's quite a different thing from saying the Muslim world as a whole is being oppressed and the West is at war with Islam. Now that, to me, is actually a conspiracy theory, and it's one that is recited not only by certain extremist Muslim groups, but it's the same conspiracy that drives, say, the English Defence League, who again believe that there is this intractable conflict between the Christian West and, the Islamic world, and the two worlds have completely different values and that they're completely incompatible, and I entirely reject that.
So do you think the two worlds are compatible, and can you give some examples of compatibility?
Well, I mean, the sort of thriving culture of British Muslims is an example of compatibility. I mean, we've seen this horrible backlash in the last 2 weeks, but it by no means represents the majority of people in Britain on either side. I mean, just look at London. I mean, look at how successful a city London is with its multi-ethnic, multi-religious population. I mean, to look at London day to day, regardless of these horrific incidents that can happen from time to time, and say, London is evidence that these different people with different religions and cultures can't get on, would just be totally mad, in my view.
So what are you hoping that the thesis of the book will sort of engender in people who read it? Because obviously lots of people are not going to read it, but those that do, what do you hope will be the kind of takeaway message that they get out of it?
Well, I hope it will help people realise that acts and statements by extremist groups, on the far right, as that is my focus, that they can often represent wider trends in society, and that it perhaps is those that we need to focus on and those that we need to challenge. So, for example, if the English Defence League is gathering support because of widespread anti-Islam attitudes, then perhaps we need to look at where those attitudes are coming from and why, and how we can tackle them across society, and not just talk about the extremists, but talk about when mainstream politicians, will bang the drum about Islam or immigration, or when newspapers do it, and perhaps we can work towards changing our whole culture so that these attitudes are lessened.
Well, Daniel, thanks very much indeed for talking to us. Daniel Trilling there, the author of I can't say the word, I have to say beep, Nasty People, the rise of the far right. Straight after this, we'll talk to Richard on the M25.
This is BBC London 94.9.
Now, what are your feelings following this latest suspected attack up in North London?
I am very, very sad.
BBC London 94.9 Breakfast. Do you notice an increase in tension?
I'm sorry, I don't want to blame the media, but there is a bit of a hype here.
With Penny Smith and Paul Ross.
What future is there for a united, cohesive Britain?
Stand in solidarity against these violent people, and that's the only way forward.
BBC London 94.9 Breakfast.
Would you recommend or encourage Londoners to give cash to homeless people?
There are thousands of people who are genuinely homeless, and we can't tell people to do it or not to do it.
Should we give cash to homeless people?
No.
Why not?
Well, I'm Scottish, I'm not going to give anybody money.
Without dwindling to Caledonians.
Weekdays from 6.
And Richard's on the line on the M25. Hello, Richard.
Oh, hi there. Is that Vanessa?
Yes, it's Vanessa. How are you?
How are you doing today?
Yes, I'm doing fine, thank you. It's a heated show, but it's an interesting show, I hope. Tell me where you stand on the whole thing.
I just called in because I hear what's going on, and I'm not an expert on any of this, but I'm trying to be a practical person.
Yeah.
What I've noted is that when something happens in society, let's just say some apparent Muslims create an act of terrorism in the name of Islam.
Yes.
I feel that when I hear the Muslim community backlashing in the media or, in the news and the press and in local communities saying, we're being singled out and persecuted for what a couple of people have done, we feel like we're being isolated and segregated from society further.
Yes.
I think the answer to that is, yes, you're absolutely right. So if I was you, I would do absolutely everything in my power to lead the way and hold the flag in ousting these people away from using your religion as the identification of their acts of terrorism.
Okay, that makes sense. So, for example, what would you do if you were a Muslim living in London today in order to achieve that?
I'm not a Muslim, so I can't be honestly practical about this. But if I use my imagination,
yes,
and I was in a community, and in that community someone was murdered on the street using a meat cleaver in the name of Islam, I would rally everyone together and say, hey guys, we better sort this out really quickly and get real clear-cut, evident approach to this problem in our community with everyone else who isn't a Muslim, because if we don't do that, we're going to get really badly segregated and pointed out and isolated, and we're going to have a horrible time in this country.
And what do you think would be the way to do that? You think it might be something like holding an anti-radicalism rally in Trafalgar Square and getting as many Muslims as possible to show up, that kind of thing?
Unfortunately, it's a bit cliche to say, but it's like running a business. You've got so many different things to consider when it comes to. I know it sounds really shallow, but you're PRing your religion at the end of the day to create a better sense of integration between social groups in this country. So, yeah, you're going to need a rally. You're going to need to get initiatives together to get people to meet at community centres doing different things. I mean, I know people who are Muslims who I play football with and all that kind of stuff, but you have to go further than that. You have this kind of maybe misconception. It could be a complete lie that mosques actually house the beginnings of certain people radicalised, and so therefore you have to quash that. But the only way of quashing those concerns of people who aren't Muslims is to have complete transparency and have almost like open days where people get together. But the bottom line is this, is that if you're in a Muslim community and you are in this country and you see people acting out acts of terror which are using your religion incorrectly, you better believe it that you should be the first people holding the flag up and saying, you know what, UK, you know what, England, Britain, we're going to sort this out ourselves. We're going to do it. We're going to oust these people from our own, underground, wherever that may be, if there is one. We're not interested as people who aren't Muslims to hear about Muslims moaning about it, because you've got to understand how people work in society. When there are different groups of people, if there's a group which has a certain tribal brand or following a way of life, and some other people come and hijack that, do something drastically terrible, you better believe it that they better be the first to try and oust it away from them and come and join us and sort it out. And that's what is the most practical thing I think should be happening. But I don't hear that. I don't hear it. I don't see it. I don't feel that's what's happening. You'll get a guy on the radio telling you how, well, we're going to talk to our youth a bit more. And no, you've got to get us involved, and you've got to show it. You've got to show us that what you're doing and how you're doing it, and how you're actually cleansing your religion from being infiltrated. I mean, they're going to say we can't stop people doing this.
Well, they might say that, but they might say that the two suspected, as I have to call them, Woolwich killers, were mavericks, were extremists, were insane. And why should every single British Muslim need to stand up and dissociate themselves from them?
I can tell you why right now.
Yes.
Because you want to tell me on the telephone, on the radio, national, on news, that those two people that killed that man were isolated and they weren't part of any community. Are you trying to tell me that they didn't know anybody, that they didn't actually have any social circles?
No, I'm not actually. No, I'm not trying to tell you that.
The point is that they did. The point is that they did. The people knew who they were. Even our security services knew who they were. So if our security services knew who they were, what? You're trying to tell me that the guys down the road that run the local or whatever it is in the shop, the Christians who run the local shop, whatever it is, or are you trying to tell me that the local Muslim community, no one knew who they were?
Well, the caller to my programme, Abdullah, the day after the killings and the day after that, I don't know if you heard the calls or not. I just want to tell you what he said, though. He said he had known one of the suspected killers for years. He'd known him from Lewisham. He said he knew exactly what he was preaching and he heard him doing it 2 weeks to the day before the Woolwich killings. And he said...
Wow, well, they better stop managing.
But listen to this, because he then said that he was so worried by the call, by what he heard this guy saying when he was preaching, that he went home and he phoned, and he described him as a brother. He didn't say it was his imam, but I took it to mean that. It may not have been, but anyway, he said he called a brother to say to him, look, this is really worrying. This is what this guy's saying. And you know, should I go, as he pronounced it on my programme, to the police? He said, should I go to the police? And the brother, or I think it was the imam, said no, because he said lots of people talk a big game. He might have just been talking, you know, you don't know if he's got any intention of doing anything. Don't go to the police. And my caller didn't go to the police. Now, the next day, so the day after he phoned and told us this, he phoned back and he said on the programme, first of all, he said that this guy, it turned out, had been known to the police. So he was saying, Vanessa, even if I had been to the police, it wouldn't have made any difference because he was already known to the police. And I said, why are you phoning me again? You know, it's great to hear from you, but what do you really want to say? It was clear there was something he wanted to say. And he said, I feel absolutely terrible that I didn't go to the police. And I can hardly bear to live with myself. And that's what he said on the programme.
Right.
So the idea that people like the two suspected killers were known to people in the community is certainly substantiated by my caller. Richard, thanks for the call. Let's move on. Let's move on to Shada in Hammersmith. Hello, good morning.
Good morning, hi.
Hello, thanks for calling. What would you like to say?
Well, I am a British Muslim. I've lived here almost all my life. I know no other society than British society. I believe I'm a person of faith. I believe I follow my religion in the way that is correct.
Yep.
I also believe that the Woolwich killings were freak, kind of almost lunatics or madmen who completely took Islam out of context. I don't believe that every Muslim should be judged by them. There are millions of Muslims living in the UK, peacefully integrating, living, you know, their personal jihad. And jihad isn't about killing everybody around you. Jihad is about struggling to be the best Muslim that you can. And in my, you know, in my day-to-day life, I, you know, complete my jihad every day. I get up, I go to work. I try to be an example of what Islam and Muslims are in society.
What do you think of what Richard, my caller just now said? You know, that if he were a Muslim, what he would do is he would want to be out there in public saying, we deplore this is appalling, they don't represent us, and anybody we know that's preaching something that's vile and violent and disgusting, we will denounce them to the police. We will make sure that we root out extremism. We're going to make this a very public thing that we are going to stand up against. Do you feel that you ought to be doing something like that you ought to, or not?
I think Islamic teaching will tell you if someone is preaching hatred, you make sure someone knows about it and it is stopped. Okay, so it's every Muslim's duty to make sure that any form of extremism is told to, you know, whoever the governing bodies are, be it the police, be it whoever. Muhammad said, do everything moderately.
Yeah.
In terms of going out and demonstrating, every time, you know, a white British guy goes out and kills somebody, all the white English society go out and demonstrate. And
hang on a second. No, but it doesn't compare at all. Because when a white British guy kills somebody, he doesn't do it in the name of Christianity. He doesn't say, I am doing this for Christ, or I'm doing this because I'm a Roman Catholic. He doesn't invoke a religion. And that's why it's not the same thing.
And other, you know, there is no one to say that one person...
But what are you talking about? The Wars of the Roses? I mean, when have we last had something like that?
In the UK, maybe not very recently, but in America, not too long ago. And do all, you know, Christians have to come out and say, this guy did this thing?
Well, I've just told you, it's most unusual, isn't it? That anyone would or ever does do that. It doesn't seem to happen with Christians or Jews or Buddhists. I mean, I've never heard anyone say, I'm killing somebody in the name of Buddha. You don't get to hear that, do you? It's a particular thing that seems, you may be right that it happens in other places and the name of Christ is invoked, but it seems to be particularly pertaining to Muslims, doesn't it, in Islam?
Unfortunately, at the moment, there seems to be a there are incidents that have been highlighted by the media that have actually happened that are to do with Muslims.
I don't know if you can hold the media responsible for highlighting what happened in Woolwich, can you?
I'm not saying the media have. I'm not holding the media responsible. I'm saying that it's come up. People have heard about it. That's all I'm saying. And I know that Islam has been used as the reason. What I'm arguing is I don't believe that it is. Absolutely everyone, we shouldn't have a mass demonstration saying not in my name, because if I've spoken to my friends, I've seen, all our Facebook groups, all our Twitter pages, everyone is saying, everyone is completely shocked and disgusted by what happened in Woolwich. We all want to live here peacefully. Mm-hmm. We came here for better lives. We came here because, so many of my friends, they've lived here for 2 or 3 generations, their families. They know no other country. They do not want, they want to live in peace and have done for years. There is no reason to think that any one of them is going to one day come up, pick up arms. Islam, that's not what Islam teaches you. Islam
very simple, very simple, very straight question. Mm-hmm. Do you know anyone at all, either in your family, among your friendship group, people's cousins, brothers, people's in-laws, anyone that you think has been radicalised? Are you aware of anyone in your community, however distant from you, that you think has been radicalised?
Absolutely not.
No one whatsoever?
No one whatsoever.
And you've never walked past and heard anyone preaching anything that has filled you with horror, and you've heard it?
To be honest, the mosque I go to is run by an embassy, so everything they say, everything is watched as it is by their own government.
Right.
There is no way anyone at that mosque would ever dare to preach anything. Mm-hmm. And there is a huge community in the Muslim world that is trying to show people the right way about Islam and trying to make sure that people actually see the real side, not everything that, obviously, all these atrocities will get the coverage because it's horrific and even we're horrified. There are grassroots level people who are just trying to do their best. There are groups of us who go out holding soup kitchens in the name of Islam every week. That doesn't get covered as much, obviously, because it's not as shocking.
No, exactly. Well, thank you for the call, and thanks very much indeed. This is from Sarah. Sarah says, great show, thank you. She says, lively discussion. I'm an indigenous English woman. I've been born and raised by a Muslim, by 2 white English parents who converted in the 1970s. In that period, there was a large number of English people who became Muslim, and it did not incur the wrath that it does today. It was considered to be a choice of faith. My parents kept their own culture, language and dress and remained English. Unfortunately, nowadays, it causes much more of an issue because Islam is seen to be a religion of violence and oppression. I do understand that some people are angry that foreign policies created division and oppression in Muslim countries, but the Muslim community must acknowledge that violence is conducted in the name of Islam. It has been conducted by other faiths also, but in the modern world, the worldly power of other religions is weakened, whereas Islam remains a rallying call for many. Muslims have no single point of authority to unite them and give advice, therefore they cannot condemn with one voice, and the people who influence those conducting violent acts often agree with them. These extremists would not listen to the moderate voices of others. I think mosques should open their doors, as in York, and welcome people in. Muslims should make an effort to integrate into mainstream society and not live on the fringes. I do not consider myself oppressed. I am glad to be a Muslim. I am proud of my race and my religion. I do not have to choose one over another. The two are compatible. That's from Sarah. We're taking your calls. We've got about 25 minutes more of this. The number's 0207 224 2000. And we'll be back with Alan in Hampstead straight after the news headlines.
Good morning. Yesterday's fire at a Somali community centre in Muswell Hill is still being investigated by Scotland Yard's counter-terrorism unit. It's being treated as suspicious, and the Muslim Council of Britain has called on the Met Commissioner to explain exactly how he plans to tackle anti-Islamic attacks in the wake of the death of soldier Lee Rigby in Woolwich. Security is tight outside the Old Bailey, where around 40 members of the English Defence League have gathered ahead of the sentencing of 6 men who plan to bomb one of their rallies. The men from Birmingham, who've already been warned they face significant custodial sentences, only failed in their plot because the gathering in West Yorkshire last summer finished earlier than expected. The former News of the World editor and number 10 head of communications, Andy Coulson, has pleaded not guilty to 3 charges relating to phone hacking and paying officials for information. Yesterday, Rebecca Brooks and almost a dozen other former colleagues also denied similar charges. Ed Miliband has promised to cap spending on social security so a future Labour government could turn the economy around and build a stronger country. He's used a speech in Newham to promise to allow councils to negotiate lower rents with landlords, to cut housing benefit and release money for house building. And Stephen Fry has admitted he tried to kill himself last year by taking pills with vodka while he was filming abroad. During an interview at a theatre in Leicester Square last night, he revealed he was found in his hotel room by a colleague. London's weather, dry and sunny and warmer than yesterday, with top temperatures of 24 Celsius, 75 Fahrenheit.
And with the travel news here on BBC London 94.9, I'm Paul Murphy. The anti-clockwise M25 still down to 3 lanes near junction 15, that's the M4, and that's following an incident yesterday. That's causing queues back to 20 for Kings Langley, and it's taking in excess of an hour or so to get through. Also at Caterham, the A22 bypass, 1 lane is closed because a lorry's broken down at the Wapses Lodge roundabout. Recovery's ongoing and it's slow on all approaches. In the city, Old Bailey is closed northbound between Ludgate Hill and Gilspur Street and will be closed until 7 o'clock tomorrow evening because of a demonstration. Buckingham Palace Road, 1 lane is shut southbound approaching Elizabeth Street, and that's while repairs to a gas leak take place. Marylebone flyover still congested coming into town. Also at High Holborn, that's starting to slow around the Kingsway junction. On the Strand, queuing westbound from Waterloo Bridge to Trafalgar Square. And on the tubes, we've still got delays on the Circle and Hammersmith and City lines. That's after this signal failure early this morning at Barbican. If you can update us, give us a call 0207 224 2000, or you can tweet at BBC Travel Alert. Paul Murphy, BBC London 94.9. Your next update's just before midday.
BBC London 94.9.
Vanessa Feltz.
Call 020 722 42000.
Marilyn says the British-born Woolwich killers are young men of West African descent. We have experienced in London too many senseless deaths of young men in stabbings and other killings from the ethnic background that these men were born into. How can these young men take on a new faith and kill in its name when young men who mirror their experience coming from the same community are dying on our streets? This leads me to think that the key is likely to be more about disaffection and anger being exploited by radical Islamists who are justifying these vile acts. The British foreign policy argument is a red herring. We need to seriously address disaffection in our communities. What else have we got? This is from Paolo. He's listening to the show in Milan. He says he thinks the main problem emerging from today's show is that a number of people have a rather twisted take on history and reality. Western nations are not in Afghanistan to fight Muslims. As a matter of fact, they're still there because the Afghan government asks them to be there, notwithstanding the fact that anyone would like to bring their troops home for many reasons, ranging from the political situation back home to the costs of such a campaign. And I personally think, says Paolo, that we should take our boys back home, but that's not the point. Iraq is a similar story. He says the freely elected Iraqi government wants the support of Western troops to maintain order, but that again is not the point. Even if one doesn't agree with what I wrote above, no one in his or her right state of mind can claim that UN-sanctioned troops are there to fight Muslims. If we look at the beginnings of Al-Qaeda, we have to accept that the group was born because US troops had been stationed in Saudi Arabia, but they'd been called in by the Saudi government. They were there to protect Saudis from Saddam Hussein, a dictator that had fought Muslims for over 20 years. In a sense, the US was there to protect Muslims, and in fact, says Paolo, Al-Qaeda in its early days never claimed that the US was there to fight Muslims. Their problem was that infidel was standing on holy soil. Foreign politics have nothing whatsoever to do with the current situation. Also, because there isn't a unified Islamic world, there are various Muslim nations or political factions with their own interests. Therefore, it's impossible not to be against some Muslims. It's impossible to be on the side of Muslims as a whole, as they're not united in purpose or anything else. We have to accept that some, not all of the Muslims, have a different way to view history than we in the Western world, Western cultures. Every Muslim will tell you it was perfectly reasonable and acceptable for Muslims to invade Spain, and that the Reconquista was a racist war against Islam. In the West, we're used to accepting every view, whereas in some Islamic movements that's not the case. Islam is right and the rest must be conquered. Finally, your listeners forget that until a few years ago, Western nations were fighting, taking side with Muslims against Serbia. Paolo says, I was there. So saying that it's all down to foreign policy is nonsense, as the UK, US, NATO's foreign policy is quite simply totally other from what they make it to be. Then he says, P.S. Some of your callers seem to have an identity crisis. Are they British or Muslims? I'm sure that you would depict yourself as British and then Jewish, but they seem to depict themselves as Muslims and, if necessary, a bit British, but only when they choose so. That, in my opinion, is part of the problem. Mind you, says Paolo, I personally think these views are minority among the whole of British Muslims, but they're a very vocal minority. Let's talk to Mehdi Hassan, political director of the Huffington Post in the UK. Hello, Mehdi. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Vanessa.
I mean, we've been talking about this now for more than 2.5 hours solidly. Immediately we're inundated with calls, and really, rather than saying that the inspiration has been the very sad burning down of the Islamic Centre in Muswell Hill, it really was, if in truth, Asghar Bukhari of the Muslim Public Affairs Committee saying that he feels that the reason for the Woolwich killing was British foreign policy, which, as you know, is directly contradictory to what Boris Johnson, the Mayor of London, said. He said it was nothing of the sort. What do you think?
Well, let me take a middle ground position here between the two. Perhaps you might want to call them extremes as a word of choice. I think, look, it's very difficult to say that Woolwich was because of X, Y, or Z. We've yet to have a trial. There are 2 suspects. There are several other arrests. Let's see what happens. Let's see what comes out.
Although, in fairness, in most unusual circumstances, we hear from the suspected killer precisely what he says his motivation is, which is not anything we ever normally get. Yeah,
we have a video in which the alleged killer talks about Afghanistan and foreign lands and killings. He also made Islamic references, etc., etc., and we've read about his background and all sorts of links, etc. Look, there still comes back to the fundamental point that we don't know what caused X, Y, or Z. We don't have a specific proximate cause as to what, lots of people are upset about the war in Afghanistan. Not everyone goes out and kills people in the street in response to it. Having said that, Boris Johnson is wrong to say it has nothing to do with Afghanistan, not just because this suspect has said so, but because pretty much in every case where a terror suspect has been captured either before or after the act, or a suicide video has emerged, foreign policy is cited. Pretty much every intelligence agency in the world, every terrorism scholar that's looked at this subject says, yes, foreign policy is clearly a factor in the so-called radicalisation process. Is it the only factor? Of course not. There are other issues. There are identity crises. There is disillusionment. There's youth. There is a perverted form of Islam, a kind of political ideology that hides behind Islamic language and rhetoric. Clearly, there are lots of factors involved. But here's the big question, Vanessa.
Yes.
Why is it that an extremist who is non-violent, and there's plenty of them around, why does a non-violent extremist become violent? I don't think anyone really has the answer to that question. What is the trigger that makes them want to kill someone?
I suppose it's very difficult to put yourself into the mind of somebody of that kind, but I suppose they consider it to be the logical conclusion of a deeply held belief.
Indeed, but why to go that far? Why does one non-violent extremist not do that and one does? And what's interesting is I interviewed a man named Mark Sageman recently, who's a former CIA case officer and a forensic psychiatrist who studied 500 terrorist biographies. And he says, you can find all sorts of common factors. He actually says religion has very little to do with it. He says foreign policy is a factor. But above all else, it's to do with peer pressure, it's to do with identity crisis, it's to do with rebellions of some form or another, either against your friends, your parents, whatever it is, if you're a convert. But fundamentally, he makes the same point that more than a decade after 9/11, we still don't know the answer to that very narrow, very specific, very important question, which is why is it a tiny minority within a minority, because extremists are a minority, but within that minority of extremists, why does a tiny minority go out and do these kind of killings?
When you say extremists are a minority, what kind of a minority are you talking about? It's always very difficult to get any kind of estimation of how many people we think in the UK at this moment do believe in those sorts of radical ideas.
Let's look at some of the rough numbers we have, and of course all these numbers are questionable. If you look at Muslim extremism, and let's take 2 types of extremism. If you look at Muslim extremism, the security services talk about kind of 2,000 to 3,000 people that they consider might be of a threat, danger, etc. That's 2,000 to 3,000 Muslims who they're monitoring out of a Muslim population in this country that's somewhere estimated around nearly 3 million.
Yes.
So you're talking about kind of less than 0.1% of the population. If you look at kind of Anjem Choudhury, who gets a lot of press, you look at the kind of demos he holds outside the US Embassy or at Wootton Bath or wherever it is, the point I always make is, I'm Muslim. I had more people at my wedding than Anjem Choudhury has at his demos. I mean, he represents no one but himself. And if you look at the far right, if you look at the EDL, we have a poll in the Observer a couple of weeks ago, 80% of the public said they would never consider joining the EDL. Just 1% of the British public say they consider themselves to be members or supporters. So these are tiny minorities on both sides trying to fuel a kind of clash of civilizations, a self-fulfilling prophecy.
So our discussion this morning has been extremely heated on, I could say on both sides, but actually there have been far more than 2 sides. It's been enormously heated from all sorts of different perspectives. The reason that we're talking about this today is the destruction, the razing to the ground of the Islamic Centre in Muswell Hill. Andrew Gilligan says there's been a vast exaggeration created by those who wish to sort of fan the flames of Islamophobia in the number of attacks.
Andrew Gilligan has an agenda that he's been pushing for many years now.
All right. Do you have one? What's your take on it? In other words, he says that the number of attacks on Muslims, the number of, incidents has been exaggerated.
To last night's burning down, because, of course, he was telling us in the Sunday Telegraph that this is all an exaggeration.
I know. Well, he wrote it before last night. So what do you think?
Look, I think there is a definite... Look, my view, again, I would take a middle position. I would say that there clearly is a threat to Muslim institutions after every terrorist attack. Whether we like it or not, there are these so-called reprisals or revenges or whatever it is, blowback in terms of attacks on Muslims, whether it's in the United States or in the UK. That's happened after 9/11. That's happened after 7/7. It's happening now after Woolwich. The Met Police, one of the commissioners was in front of the Home Affairs Select Committee on Monday. She said that she didn't believe this was worse than the 7/7 aftermath. I mean, look, it's very hard to tell because in 2005 or in 2001, we didn't have Twitter, we didn't have Facebook. It's much easier for these extremists to have a platform in which to vent their hate and bigotry and bile. We didn't monitor attacks in the same way we do now. Tell Mama, which is the monitoring organisation that statistics are often used in the press these days, says I think 11 mosques have been attacked since Woolwich. In Grimsby, 2 former soldiers are under arrest in suspicion with an arson attack. We have this incident in Muswell Hill. We don't know who's behind it. Clearly, Muslims are under threat from all sorts of horrible reprisals. There's no doubt about the fact that Islamophobia is on the rise in the UK. You only have to look at the polling. You only have to look at some of the media coverage. But is it out of control? Are we living on the verge of some kind of Holocaust? Of course not. I would still argue that Britain is the best place to live as a Muslim compared to any other European or Western country.
Thank you very much indeed. Mehdi Hassan, the political director of the Huffington Post in the United Kingdom. Let's talk to Alan in Hampstead.
Hi, good morning. I'm caller.
Welcome.
I didn't hear all of your conversation, but I certainly heard the speaker who's on at about 9:15 talking about and attributing all the responsibility to foreign policy and so on. This is an argument that, quite frankly, makes me, and I'm sure lots of other people, very wild, because this country has a right, a democratic right, to determine its foreign policy. If people don't like it, then they have a right to object to it in normal democratic means, but they don't have a right to take the law into their own hands and act in a violent way. And what it seems to me is, and I think to other people that I've spoken to, is that there seems to be an attitude amongst certain Muslims, not all Muslims by any means, but certain Muslims, that they can follow the dictates of their law that say, if someone attacks us verbally or whatever, that we have the right to take the law into our own hands regardless of where we're living and attack in a violent way. I mean, this young man that was killed in Woolwich, they didn't know for certain that he was a soldier. All they knew is that he was wearing a Help for Heroes T-shirt, which is rather different. If they would have seen him walking around in the soldier's uniform, then maybe they might have an argument, but they weren't. They just went and attacked the first person. And this seems to be the attitude that is unfortunately too prevalent in this country. But at the end of the day, what the extremist Muslims are saying, or the person that you had on your station right at the early stage, was saying that we can blame this, we're right, therefore we can do what we want. We can determine foreign policy. And I think most people would be absolutely outraged with that.
He didn't actually say that. He didn't say we can determine foreign policy.
He said that we can react to foreign policy in the way that we want to.
Well, no, he didn't say that either. He said that the explanation for what occurred in Woolwich is British foreign policy, but he didn't say that was all right, and he didn't say we can react in any way we want to.
He seemed to be sort of justifying. The problem that his people forget is that look what's going on with the rest of the Muslim world. Look at what's going on in Syria. Look what's going on in Iraq. And look what happened, for example, when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. These were so-called, all Muslims that loved each other. The first day that Saddam Hussein went into Iraq, he killed 600 innocent Kuwaitis. There seems to be, unfortunately, this sort of attitude of violence. And I find it, and I think a lot of other people find it extremely difficult to understand this whole violent mentality.
Well, but what you hear is most British Muslims, the vast overwhelming majority, saying that they are not violent. They wouldn't dream of being violent. That's not how they consider Islam to be. They think it's absolutely antithetical to the entire essence of Islam, and they deplore and abhor it. So, these are massive generalisations being made. Alan, thanks. I'm going to move on just to get as many calls in as I can, and thank you for calling. Good to talk to you. Let's go to Raf in West Norwood. Hello, Raf.
Hi, Vanessa, how are you?
All right. I mean, it's been a long show, I think. It's been interesting, but boy, it's been very heated, the whole thing. Where are you on this one, Raf?
Well, there's lots of conflicting stuff that's been coming across.
Yes.
I mean, for instance, they're saying there's no, Muslims saying that they're against it and stuff. Last year, there was a conference attended by over 150,000 Muslims, which were for moderation in Islam. I'm not a religious person, but that was largely unreported. And yet we've got Adnan Chowdhury, who has possibly 1,000 followers all over the newspapers. Do you know what I mean? So I think to a certain extent the coverage has led to where we are now. Also, listening to Stephen earlier on, a little knowledge is a bad thing. Do you know what I mean? And you can take, if I took verses from the Bible, you mentioned Leviticus, there are other things about, letting your daughter allowing your daughter into slavery, all these other kind of things. It would make it sound like a horrific book. Mm-hmm. Do you know what I mean? There's so many things in it that are bad. I mean, historically, the Muslims have been... The Caliphate was one of the most religiously tolerant empires in the world. It had Jewish people who came from Spain, fled to Bosnia there. It had Christians of Orthodox and the Roman Catholic all living under one empire, where, in Europe, the Roman Catholics were being persecuted and people being burnt in the stake.
You're absolutely right, but what happened then? I mean, would you concede that various extremist leaders appropriated Islam and used it for their own ends, and that therefore it came to be in many cases associated with a kind of oppression? Because what you say about the Caliphate, I know is true. Yes.
Yeah, I think the thing with it is that you've got the people that are doing the damage to the religion. I mean, it's like, for instance, the Red Brigade and, the terrorist people in the 70s and the 80s who sort of said they represented a political ideology. There were other people who had that same belief but wouldn't have gone to anywhere near the lengths that they were prepared to go to. So there's always going to be a fringe on any kind of religious or political movement that are going to be willing to absolutely... go far too far. Belief. The problem with religion is it gives you a belief in a complete truth in yourself about what you're doing, and no matter how misguided that is, and that's in all religions. Christianity, there's the history of martyrs. In every religion, it gives you this misguided belief that because you are partaking as a warped part of that religion, you're going to have everlasting life afterwards. So it's very difficult to argue with people who follow that ideology and to find a way of dissuading them. I think that the thing is there are moderate Muslims, and I can't say, I know quite a few Muslims from different parts of the world. There's not any of them that I know who would resort to violence or who would preach that violence, but then possibly I don't mix in the circles where there are people like that, and also possibly people who are like that probably wouldn't want to mix with me because I have non-religious views. Do you see what I mean?
Yes, I do, and thanks for the call. Let me move on. This is from Thomas. He says, I continue to admire your mainly even-handed feeling of difficult calls, which I appreciate, Thomas, thank you, but can you please emphasise that there are no longer any British soldiers in Iraq and that British soldiers in Afghanistan are essentially on a peacekeeping mission supported by many Muslims. Thousands of Muslims are being slaughtered in these countries by other Muslims. The blaming of British foreign policy is an excuse, not a cause. Also, please tell your newsroom that the EDL is not a far-right group. It has no political programme and should be described as an anti-Islamist movement. Can you also emphasise that the incident in Muswell Hill is only still a suspected arson attack? I think the police have been premature in trying to fill in the causes of the fire with no evidence. Who saw the graffiti? Where was it? Who would stop to paint graffiti on a building before burning it to the ground? The BBC should not echo this irresponsibility. And how many attacks against mosques have there been? We think it's 12. My total stands at 3. Grimsby, Gillingham and Grays, none of which caused sufficient damage. Also, now that we've had one extreme viewpoint, how about balancing it with someone who knows something about Islamism? Douglas Murray, Melanie Phillips, Peter Hitchens, etc., etc. Well, we did. I think we've done our best to do that. I wonder how one can state that the act against Lee Rigby was terrorism, but then can't see the link between those actions and our foreign policy. Surely the term terrorism suggests it is a fight against Western policy, notably foreign policy. Yvonne says it was an evil act. No ifs, no buts, no wherefore. Do not justify an act of evil evil, i.e. the barbarism unleashed on Lee Rigby. It is this religious fanaticism that is insanely dangerous. Jane says, please point out to your listeners supporting the view of the representative of the Muslim Council, just going to cough, that the majority of Muslims are not killed as the result of our foreign policy, but by other Muslims fighting amongst themselves. Alan says, your guest stated that the problem is due to foreign policy. So why did the Muslims invade the Holy Land when we had no foreign policy in those days? They also invaded Spain. The Muslims have always tried to rule the world. And straight after this, we'll find out what's coming up on Robert's show today.
BBC London 94.9. Hello, girls.
Hi, Joe.
Weekday afternoons with Joe Good.
This sort of just plays right into my lap, this exhibition.
Joe Good.
And in the top of the mirror, as if it had just been written in the steam. Help me.
No.
Joe Good.
Your dad must be an extremely good-looking man.
We are actually a 39 brothers and sisters family.
He's enjoying his life, isn't he?
Weekday afternoons from 3.
Pornographic spoons.
Pornographic knife handle.
Oh, I've got to get my glasses on for this.
It's not what you're paying for the sun and the sea. Nowhere's perfect.
Did they all come back, Jeff? Did your kids come? So you are literally living on different sides of the world.
We are.
Golly, what a call to end on. Grass isn't greener, eh?
On BBC London 94.9.
Robert's here.
Hello, how are you?
Fine. You're not going to be embroiled in this topic, which has been engulfing us pretty much since 9 o'clock this morning.
No, I shan't, but I shall say that I think you've handled it very professionally indeed.
Thank you very much. I mean, people are obviously feeling exceptionally heated on every possible side. And,
of course.
I think it's a good opportunity for people to just say, particularly people who feel they're misrepresented, to get a chance to say what they really think.
Absolutely. But I think one thing, I won't comment on the topic, but I will comment on your handling, which I think we've had as much light as heat in the conversations this morning, and I think that's quite remarkable at a time like this.
Yes, I do hope so. I mean, and actually, working on this station, it's great because we do get people who do have a very...
And we get often very, very intelligent calls, and people who can see through the hubbub and the tumult of the moment, really, and I think that's very important.
I think so too. So I am very grateful to everyone who phoned today, and thanks very much, Robert. Tell me what you're doing.
Well, we're going to change the tone a little by going to the pictures with Jason Solomons. He's going to be taking us in to see the latest releases, and then I think probably or certainly one of the finest British film directors of our era, who is Shane Meadows.
Oh, I was once in one of his films.
Were you?
Yes.
What one?
I was one of the greatest moments of my entire life, honestly. It really
what were
was.
you in?
Once Upon a Time in the Midlands.
Were you?
Yes, and the film begins...
I've seen the film.
...with Robert Carlyle waking up in some kind of tenement flat in Glasgow or something like that. And his the very first words of the whole film are, "Beep that Vanessa." And I am on the television... And he's watching the show, and then he sees, I think it's his ex-girlfriend or something, being proposed to by someone else on the and then I had to go and shoot this programme for Shane Meadows in the Midlands.
Brilliant.
Oh, it was absolutely marvellous. And then I got to go to the sort of the premiere of the film at the Edinburgh Film Festival.
Brilliant.
God, it was marvellous.
Well, he's coming in.
Oh, do give him a big kiss from me. I really love him. He's such an interesting and
he is.
Creative and kind of he's an amazing fellow.
Well, he's got a new film out.
Possibly
about the Stone
messianic
Roses.
about filmmaking.
So he's coming in. We've got Shane Meadows and Jason Solomon, so 2 big dollops of movies. Then we've got a man called Tim Bryers, who's one of the organisers of the London Map Fair, which is up at the Royal Geographical Society. Have you ever been to the RGS in Kensington?
No, but I mean, cartography is a wonderful thing.
I love cartography, and I love the RGF, which is right there by the Albert Hall. It's on Kensington Gore. And it's like stepping back to 1923. It's as if, Scott of the Antarctic is about to set off. I mean, the minute you walk through that room, it's time travel as well as geographical travel. It's fantastic. So we're going to look at the London Map Fair. And talking of travel, Paul Theroux is coming in.
Wow.
The doyen
of
travel writers.
That's dead impressive.
Exactly.
God, Rod Stewart and Paul Theroux in the same week.
Not in the same route. Well, not at the same time.
The same week.
There's no duet between the two of them.
Some great guns, though, that.
It certainly is. Paul Theroux is coming in. He's written what may well, I think, from looking at it, be his last travel book, The Last Train to Zona Verde, which is a journey he makes across Africa, kind of retracing steps of a journey he did as a younger man, because he isn't a young man anymore. And travel doesn't come as easily as it once did. And it's partly a book about that, as well as a book about where is Africa going. So he's coming in the last half an hour of the show. And then before that, talking of Rod, in his honour, we've done a cover-to-cover this week of The First Cut is the Deepest.
Wow.
P.P. Arnold versus Rod Stewart. So 2 great versions of a fantastic song.
I'm not going to say I'm going to be drawn. Not going to be drawn, but after I saw Rod live a couple of weeks ago with you...
And he, honestly,
I did think, oh gosh, he really has got it going on.
He still has.
Every ounce of it still, which is remarkable. remarkable.
And when he came in here, and I suspect his wife goes wherever he goes.
I think she does.
She literally.
I've never seen him without her or her without him.
She came in here, and I was kind of probing.
She's beautiful, isn't she?
She's very beautiful and very tall
and lovely, and she's an Essex girl.
Yeah, and I was probing him gently about former blondes, and he kept looking out as if to say, "What am I allowed to say here?"
What I like about her, old Penny, is she always takes her mum and dad with her. She always takes, her family are always there. It's very nice.
We played a track at the end of the interview, and she started dancing. She's literally there.
She really loves him, and she likes his music. She enjoys it. She's a nice girl.
That's what we're doing today.
Lovely, Robert. Thanks very much indeed. Let's talk to Paul in Northolt. Hello, Paul.
Hello, Vanessa. How you doing?
All right, thanks, sir. Hello. So, what you've been listening? I understand. What do you think of it? What do you want to say?
Yeah, brilliant show today. Some really interesting different points. But I just the reason I phoned was why there have been a few calls for the Muslim, in brackets, in inverted commas, for the Muslim community to stand up and speak out against this horrible act that happened in Greenwich. Why should they? Why should they? We, the Christians community as such, didn't stand up and speak as one against the IRA, the Catholic community, the Protestant community. And I agree with one of your Muslim callers that there is no such thing as the Muslim community. I've got an inside link to it via my relationship. I'm engaged to a Muslim girl, and obviously she's got a Muslim family. There is no Muslim community as such. They've got extended families. They go to the mosque. They know their local set of friends. But it's no more a Muslim community than it is a white community. I'm not linked to every other white bloke in the world as part of a community.
Mm.
And it's just, why don't the English community stand up against the EDL and say, we abhor these acts that...
But I think we do. We do stand up against EDL by essentially not voting that kind of party in, by not giving the BNP any seats, by responding in a certain kind of way. I think we do stand up, don't we? And there are very, very few of them. That's the other thing. It's not as if they're a growing force. It doesn't seem as if they are.
Well, I don't think we do stand up in our hearts and in our actions and in our deeds. We abhor what the EDL do. I certainly do. They don't do it in my name, but I don't stand up. I've never been on a march. I've never gathered at a church to say let's oppose the EDL. We don't stand up against them. We let them get on with it. We tuck up. We say that's terrible, and. They are a far-right fascist group. They're focusing on Islam and Islamophobia, and there is Islamophobia in the country. I think it's the fear of a different culture. But did you see that programme on BBC 3 a couple of weeks ago about Bradford?
No.
That was, if the white community integrates and meets and mixes with the Muslim community, then, as Bradford proves, everyone gets on like a house on fire.
Paul, thanks for the call. You finished off the show. Thanks everybody who joined in this morning. It's certainly been a spirited and passionate discussion, and I do thank you for giving your point of view. Thanks to Kate producing, thanks to Mark, Mira and Gurpreet on the phones, thanks to Ola driving the desk. Robert's coming up with a really fantastic show, including Paul Theroux, which should be great, and I will see you in the morning. Enjoy the weather. Lots of love. Bye-bye.
With the Trav News here on BBC London 94.9, I'm Paul Murphy. The anti-clockwise M25 lane 1 remains closed 16 to 15. That's the M40 to the M4, and that's following yesterday's accident. That cherry picker is still being dismantled, and queues are back to junction 20 for Kings Langley. Clockwise, one lane is shut for recovery of a lorry that's broken down near Clackett Lane services. Queues in the works back towards junction 5. That's the M26. On the A2 at New Cross, the New Cross Road blocked eastbound outside New Cross Gate Station, and that's following a collision. Expect delays. On the A22 Caterham bypass, there's a lane blocked on the Wopses Lodge roundabout, and that's for recovery of a lorry that's broken down. Traffic's pretty slow on all approaches there. In the city, Old Bailey is closed northbound until 7 o'clock tomorrow evening because of a demonstration that's planned to go ahead outside the Old Bailey. Expect delays on nearby routes. On Buckingham Palace Road, one lane is shut at Elizabeth Street for repairs to a gas leak. That's mainly affecting things on the southbound side. In Camden Town, Pratt Street has repairs going on westbound from Bayham Street to Camden High Street, and also on Camden High Street at Chalk Farm Road. The traffic lights weren't working earlier on. I think it's still some short delays there too. Notting Hill Gate, that stays closed Pembridge Gardens to Notting Hill Gate Tube Station for those ongoing major repairs. And on the Tube, after a signal failure at Barbican early this morning, both the Circle and Hammersmith and City lines still have minor delays. And the Bakerloo line, Edgware Road Tube Station, stays closed and will be until the end of this year. That's while the lifts are replaced. If you can update us throughout the afternoon, give us a call 0207 224 2000, or you can tweet us at BBC Travel Alert. Paul Murphy, BBC London 94.9, and Louise Peppers back with with more at past.
On 94.9 FM, DAB, satellite and online.
London's news, London stories.
BBC London 94.9.
London's news at midday. I'm Matthew Schofield. Crime Stoppers is offering what it calls a potentially substantial reward to help catch whoever vandalised 2 war memorials in central London. Since Lee